Yes. Så tror jeg vist, vi er ved at være klar. Jeg håber, I nød den lille forfriskning, der var her til jer. Stort velkommen. Jeg vil godt starte med at give ordet til Søren Peschardt, Viceborgmester i Vejle Kommune.
Tak for det. Jeg vil gerne byde jer velkommen her til Resiliens konference. Vi har givet konferencen navnet Fremtiden tilhører byerne, eller The Future Belongs to the Cities. Det er en stor ære for mig at få lov til at åbne sluserne og skodderne, gribe handsken og give bolden op til den første resilienskonference i Vejle. Det er jeg personligt rigtig glad for. Velkommen til alle oplægsholderne, som hedder her på forreste række. Henning, Boje, Andersen, der er forsker fra Teknik University of Denmark. Randbøll, Wolff, direktør, Chora Connection. Jørgen Andersen, direktør, Green Tech Center, medstifter af Resiliens Lab. Dragmose-Hansen, projektkoordinator af aktiv medborgerskab. Og så Sloth, miljødirektør, teknik- og miljødirektør i Vejle Kommune. Det er indlægsholdere, som kan give os nogle gode oplevelser her hen over eftermiddagen. A warm welcome to one of the most leading political academics in Resiliens, Mr. Benjamin Barber, and Mr. Vikram Singh, Associated Director, Rockefeller Foundation, being the foundation which has established the global network 100 Resilient Cities, a global network that Vejle has been part of since the 3rd of December 2013. Very nice to see you again, and nice to see you back here in Vejle. Welcome. Awesome to see you here in the only Scandinavian city which is part of the global network. Having you, Mr. Barber, and you, Mr. Singh, as the main speakers of this conference today underlines that the Resilience Challenge is a global effort which accounts for a lot of inspiration, willpower and network to succeed. Konferencens hovedtema handler om byernes fremtid og deres innovative modstandskraft. Modstandskraft over for økonomiske, sociale og miljømæssige udfordringer. Jeg er derfor utrolig glad for, at Vejle tager begrebet resiliens eller resilience alvorligt og har kastet sig ud i et både globalt og lokalt samarbejde om at finde vejen og de løsninger, som skal skabe morgendagens resiliente byer, og dermed sætte rammen for, hvordan vi kommer til at leve sammen som mennesker. Det er en stor udfordring. Det kræver mod, kreativitet og fremsyn. Det kan jeg mærke, at det er der i det her lokale i dag. Det lover godt. Med konferencen vil Vejle Kommune markere, at vi sætter os på forkant af udviklingen. Vi vil ikke gå bagved og sige gå. Nej, vi vil gå foran og sige kom. Vi vil give bolden op til samskabelse, videndeling og netværksdannelse. Disse tre ting er netop helt essentielle for at kunne udvikle byernes modstandskraft over for fremtidige omvæltninger, og for at kunne lykkes med vores indsats på området. Derfor mødes både repræsentanter fra andre kommuner, erhvervsliv, politikere og borgere her i Vejle i dag, for at få dyrebare input, som rent faktisk ikke kan skaffes andre steder i verden. Ingen andre steder end lige her. Lige her i dag. Det er os, der her i dag, der kommer med til at præge fremtidens resiliensdagsorden. Men hvad er det så for en fremtid, vi kigger ind i? På nuværende tidspunkt har vi en stærk formodning om, hvilke udfordringer, der vil præge byernes fremtid. Vi ved, at globaliseringen og klimaforandringen vil få stor betydning, men vi kommer aldrig helt til at kende det fulde omfang og præcis, hvordan de vil præge netop byernes fremtid. Vi skal derfor begynde med at lære mere af andre og sætte prøvehandlinger i gang. Prøvehandlinger, som skal øge vores indsigt og gøre os klar til en ukendt, men også spændende fremtid. En fremtid med nye muligheder. Resiliens er netop en måde at forstå og håndtere en sådan virkelighed, præget af usikkerhed og ubalance, men også et væld af nye potentialer for byens udvikling, en bæredygtig fremtid. Før man talte om resiliente byer, var begrebet resiliens centralt inden for f.eks. psykologien, hvor det fremhæver menneskers evne til at overvinde belastninger og risikofaktorer i livet. Her handler resiliens om, hvordan mennesker udvikler øget livskraft gennem kreative problemløsninger, kollektiv og social robusthed. Inden for de senere år er det blevet en ny retning inden for fremtidens by- og samfundsudvikling. Det skyldes, at fremtidens byer og samfund skal evne at håndtere langt flere udefra kommende hændelser, både de langvarige og de pludselige påvirkninger. Det er en stor opgave for enhver organisation at takle disse udfordringer på egen hånd. Det er derfor, vi er her sammen. Med fokus på resiliente byer følger også nogle helt konkrete krav til den måde, vi samarbejder om at udvikle vores by på, hvor vi i højere grad skal indgå i nye partnerskaber på tværs af kommuner, erhvervsliv, borgere, med henblik på at samskabe de løsninger, fremtiden fordrer. Vi, det vil altså sige stat, kommune, virksomheder, politikere og civilsamfund, er derfor i stigende grad blevet hinandens forudsætninger, og derfor er involvering, samskabelse, netværksdannelse blevet de afgørende faktorer i byernes evne til at opbygge netop modstandskraft. Og det der er en tanke og en adfærd, som skal spredes, det er dagens og morgendagens dagsorden. Fremtidens by kan ikke løse alverdens udfordringer, såsom klimaforandringer, social og økonomisk ulighed, alene inden for én sektor. Byer og organisationer skal udvikle sig sammen og på tværs af landegrænser i intelligente netværk. Også af den grund er vi rigtig glade for at være blevet en del af netværket 100 Resilience Cities, som har været startskud til den her proces, og vi er jo først lige kommet i gang. Personligt glemmer jeg aldrig, da Elisabeth Gregersen og jeg var i New York den 3. december 2013, hvor vi blev udnævnt som en af de første 33 byer, sammen med andre lokalsamfund, som blandt andet Rio de Janeiro, Bangkok, Rom, Mexico City, New Orleans og Dakar. Det var som om, at der blev taget helt særligt godt imod os. Lille os fra Vejle. Vi er små i det selskab. Lige den dag kunne vi mærke, at alle kiggede på os. Alle ville vide, hvem er den lille dreng i klassen. Vi havde et moment of fame lige der midt på den store scene. Og det var vel at mærke før cocktailpartiet, at præsidenten for Rockefeller Foundation, Judith Raddan, besvarede mit spørgsmål. Dear Judith, where can this take us? Med et, Dear Vejle, the sky is the limit. Det var en helt særlig og intens oplevelse, også på det personlige plan. Et par helt vidunderlige dage, og hvor er det dog en dejlig by. Fedt koncept, det der med cocktails. Vi fik fortalt, og vi fik vist, at we are in it to win it. Netop fordi vi vil det, har vi inviteret den førende forsker og teoretiker Benjamin Barber til byen for at komme med sit bud på, hvordan fremtidens byudvikling kommer til at ske, og hvordan vi kan arbejde strategisk inden for den nye dagsorden. Han er overbevist om, at udviklingen kommer til at foregå i et væld af netværk af hidtil uset antal og karakter. Det vil Barber fortælle os om meget mere om lige om lidt. Det er vores brændende ambition, at vi i Vejle skal gå forrest i udviklingen af morgendagens resiliente byer. Sikre os en førerposition både nationalt og internationalt. Vi har alle forudsætningerne. Hvis vi har modet af banen vores. Vi kan blive fremtidens netværksby, stedet hvor viden samles, hvor viden er. Gennem medlemskabet af netværket 100 Resilience Cities vil vi både kunne lære og forstå vores udfordringer set i et globalt perspektiv. Og vi har samtidig mulighed for at dele vores løsninger med hele verden. Videndeling på allerhøjeste niveau. Derfor også en affyringsplatform for de af lokale virksomheder, der har mod til at deltage. The sky is the limit. For at skabe overblik er vi ved at udvikle en resiliensstrategi for Vejle. En strategi, der vil komme med et bud på og kan takle og supportere de udfordringer, vi vil møde. Fordi vi vil møde det, og vi vil takle det. Det kan vi. Det fortæller vores Chief Resilient Officer mere om lige om lidt. Svært navn. Nu er der blot tilbage at ønske alle en rigtig god konference. Sortere af de tanker og input, som indlægsholderne kommer med. Vi har samlet den ypperste viden. Del gerne. Jo flere, der tænker resilienstanken, jo mere bæredygtigt bliver de løsninger, vi finder i fællesskab. Ja, resiliens er kommet til Vejle. Ikke bare for at blive, nej, også fordi det giver god mening. Now I will pass the floor to Mr. Jonas Kroustrup, Chief Resilient Officer, the City of Vejle. He will guide us through the afternoon. Remember, the future belongs to the cities that dares. Welcome to Vejle.
Tusind tak. Tak, Søren. Tak for den her fantastiske rammesætning af dagen i dag. Der er ingen tvivl om, at vi jo med det her vil ligesom prøve at markere, at vi er godt på vej til at begynde at finde nogle løsninger på nogle af de dagsordner og de udfordringer, som Søren har beskrevet. Vi har sat en konference sammen, hvor vi gerne vil markere, åbningen på det her. Vi vil gerne begynde at dele med jer de tanker, vi begynder at gøre os omkring det her. And to honor our sort of guests from the US, we have divided the conference into two sections. So the first one will be in English, and the other one will be in Danish, where we also will have more of the local perspectives on what we're working with. Our program today is divided in this, and we will first have our good friend from the 100 resilient cities, and then we will get perspectives on the policy issues from Denmark, from Chora connection, Randbøll, Wolff. And then we have also asked one of our other good friends, Professor Henning Boje from Danish Technical University, to join us here. And then our keynote speaker, Mr. Barber, will end the first session. And after that, we will invite all the speakers to join us for a little panel talk, where we hopefully can get perspectives on the future of cities and resilience in a global context, and connect it hopefully to Vejle. But first speaker, Mr. Vikram Singh, please give him a hand.
Hello? Hello?
You're on.
Is this on? Hello? Can everyone hear me? Hi, hello. Let me just open up, thank you, Honorable Deputy Mayor, my Resilience brother Jonas, distinguished speakers, distinguished thinkers like Benjamin Barber. The fact that we're all here in Vejle says a lot about what is happening in Vejle. I travel all around the world, and the fact that I'm here in this, I won't call it a small town, but I'll call it a smaller place, the smallest in our network, says a lot about why I'm here. We sort of had the honor of bringing Vejle into our network very early on. As I think the Honorable Deputy Mayor said, it's one of our earlier cities. And so we saw this as a real chance to do something innovative. We saw Vejle as a resilience laboratory. And here's a chance for you to do all of your thinking and to bring it to the fore and to share it with the world. And so being a part of, having Vejle be a part of our network is very special to us. And it's very special to the world. I travel all around the world, and people ask me, why Vejle? I was just in Barcelona last week. I recognized some friends here from Barcelona, and they were like, why Vejle? Vejle is a small place doing very big things, and I like to say that. And it's true. People are talking about Vejle in India, where I was before Barcelona. People are talking about Vejle in the United States. People are talking about Vejle in Copenhagen. And Copenhagen is always asking, what about us? We're Copenhagen. And we get to tell them, but yes, but you can go and talk to Jonas. You can go to Vejle anytime. Why are you calling New York to speak to Vejle? So, congratulations. 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 As you can tell, and I will hope to meet every single person in the room, I'm a very informal person. I hate giving PowerPoint presentations. Please come and talk to me. If anything I say right now is unclear, raise your hand. Let's talk. This is about your ideas. You're already doing resilience work. We are just here to catalyze change and to create a marketplace of ideas. I believe in the work that we're doing. It's very powerful work. But let's make this about you and not about Rockefeller and New York and all these other things and money. This is not about money. It's a very simple thing. We are paying for a chief resilience officer in your city. He is a part of a global network, and they are exchanging ideas every day. I talk to Jonas practically every day. And that's the power of what I'm here to discuss with you, the power of ideas, not of money, the power of your ideas. So, without further ado, maybe just a little bit about myself. I'm Vikram Singh, Associate Director. I don't like that title. Again, it's very formal. I like the term relationship manager, and I feel like Jonas's counselor sometimes, bringing ideas from around the world to him and to Vejle, and then taking his ideas and sharing them in other cities where I work around the world. I am Indian, Spanish, American, to further confuse you. And so, yeah, people ask me, I'm fairly old. I won't tell you how old I am. My father went to Spain to help design the first nuclear power plant a long, long time ago from India, and stayed, and I was sent to the United States for my schooling. So I'm all those things, and I say that not to distinguish myself. I say that as an example of how the world is operating now. I think I come into contact with people who are like me everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, and as I look around the room, you know, we are all part of a global community now, too. There are people in Vejle, 300 out of every 10,000, I understand, come from non-Western countries. I'm going after this, I'm going to Rotterdam, where by the year 2020, 50% of the population of the city will have been born outside of Holland. They speak 174 different languages in Rotterdam. And so how do you have a conversation around resilience? How do you have a conversation around what it is to be a citizen? So we can talk about bridges, and we can talk about climate change and all these other things, but it's about people, bringing people together around ideas. I'm already taking too long. What is 100 Resilient Cities? We are a $100 million commitment from the Rockefeller Foundation to build urban resilience around the world. Again, this is a safe space. Let's talk openly. Our board of directors is meeting and recognizing that $100 million isn't enough. It'll actually end up being around $150 million, so that's a big number. But as you spread it across 100 cities around the world, you begin to see that it's not about money. It's about catalyzing change. We're here to help cities build resilience, and we are sort of financed by Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, but our hope is to build this network and to have it be its own standalone entity in the next 2 to 5 years. Why were we created? I think we all realize, I talked a little bit about globalization earlier, but there's also urbanization. By the year 2050, 75% of the world's population will live in cities. I'm just coming from India, where that's very, very, very evident. We're talking of cities of upwards of 15 to 20 million people living in these cities that were designed to hold 2 to 3 million. So urbanization is happening, whether or not we recognize it, in places like Vejle. Globalization. I'm standing in front of you today as a documentation of a global lifestyle. My wife is Serbian, to further confuse you. So yes, this is also happening. All of you get online every day and just talk with people all around the world from Vejle. So this is also happening, exchanging ideas. And climate change. Climate change, we know is happening. You live in a city by the sea. You deal with rising water every day. But even beyond that, I would like to broaden that. There's disaster risk management. And that can come, unfortunately, catastrophe will come. I want to take a moment here to just sort of express my profound respect to the people of Denmark for what happened in Copenhagen, and before that in Paris. And we begin to see that this is a broader conversation about catastrophe will come. When catastrophe comes, how do we tie people together? How do we tie people to their cities? And how do cities respond? So that's why we were created. And now my clicker isn't working, so I will do that. So yes, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to catalyze social, economic, physical resilience. Many of you in the room are, as I said, already doing resilience work. You're working on bridges, you're working on climate adaptation, you're working in arts and culture. I just spoke to someone from the theater, it was fascinating. You're working in all these things. Jonas's job, the Honorable Deputy Mayor, city leadership, is to bring all this together and make a collective decision about where you're going to take your city in the future. We're trying to build this global practice. Our dream is to have a chief resilience officer all around the world. We like to go around the world and say, we want it to be as common to have a CRO as it is to have a police chief in your city. You know, no one would ever think about having a city without a fire chief. How could you have a city without someone to bring together all the work that's happening? In San Francisco, they have 32 different climate adaptation plans. 32. So everyone is worried about climate adaptation, but no one has taken the time to bring it together into one cohesive climate adaptation plan for the city. That's a demonstration of what a CRO can do. And we're trying to catalyze a market as well, grow a market of ideas. Not just of ideas, but also of products, and I'll get to that a little bit later too. There's a lot of times private sector firms, academics in the room, artists, always talk about we don't know how to interact with cities. Cities have their own sort of municipal structures in place. So we're trying to facilitate that conversation around the world. Oh, now my clicker is working. What is resilience? Cities rely on a complex web of systems, institutions, infrastructure, information. This is not new to anyone in the room. Many of you are working in systems and physical things like bridges, building things. Others of you are working in planning processes. And we're trying to tie it together into a robust system that recognizes all the work that's already happening. This is our definition of resilience. And everyone has their own. And everyone is certainly allowed to have their own. There's three things that I like to point out here. Let me just read it very quickly. City resilience is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. Let me point out three things that I find very powerful about what we're trying to do in 100 resilient cities. We believe that it's not just important to survive and adapt, but to use difficult times to grow. And if you have the right government structures in place, if you have the right people in your city, you can use very difficult circumstances like what happened in Copenhagen to grow, to build a more inclusive society, to have an honest conversation. And that's, I hope, why we're all in this room together. Another thing is that there's a recognition that there are chronic underlying stresses like unemployment, aging infrastructure, in this city, an aging population, that are exacerbated when an acute shock comes. So you can talk about floods, but you have to talk about floods and how it's impacting immigrant groups. You have to talk about floods and how it's impacting older people. You have to talk about floods in that context, not just about bridges, but it's about both of those things, the intersection of shocks and stresses. And finally, just to say that, again, as I say in the bottom here, it's about citizens, particularly the poor and the vulnerable. When disaster comes, it's about neighbor calling on neighbor. Disaster, unfortunately, as we all know, will come. But do you have enough social fabric? Have you created enough social bond that when the time comes, you feel comfortable to go on your neighbor's door and ask for help, and they come to yours? So that's a very important part of resilience. Let me just say, and we'll talk more a little bit later in our open and honest conversation about what that means in Scandinavian societies. Typically, the state has been sort of this monolithic mechanism whereby it's delivered services. But I don't know if that's been a very interactive conversation between citizens. And I think there's a space there, particularly in places like Vejle, Denmark, and other parts of Scandinavia. We have friends here from Sweden as well, where there's a real opportunity to have an open, honest dialogue about what it is to be an inclusive society. Just some examples here of acute shocks. I go around the world and we can talk about what various cities are facing. I think rising sea levels, the acts of terror, I mean, those are very evident here in places like Denmark. But there's chronic underlying stresses as well. We've talked a lot about certain parts of the city that aren't really involved in the governance conversation. We've talked about an aging population. We've talked about what's happening with the government here. So we can again, talk about that more frankly in our discussion, but we're looking at the intersection of these. A little bit about our city resilience framework. This is something which I hope through the work of my friend Jonas you might have already seen, and I don't want to make this a scientific conversation, but we believe in a very broad, holistic view of resilience. So you'll hear other eminent thinkers and speakers come up and talk about green technology, talk about very technical things. We think it's important to have all those things included in the conversation of resilience. So you can talk about knowledge, leadership, and strategy. Just to simplify it, knowledge. We talk about infrastructure and environment, certainly. The hard assets that make a city, hospitals, bridges, tunnels. You can talk about how people are organized, and that's very important in a place like Vejle. Economy and society. But lastly, we think the last piece is the most important piece, and that's people, health and well-being. And so that's where it all comes together. A little bit about our program, and not to stand here and tell you a lot about us, but we have a little bit about the sort of what I go around the world and try to do. This isn't about just presentations, but this is about actionable things. We try to go into each city. Well, let me dive into each one of our 4 core offerings. The Chief Resilience Officer, Jonas, maybe you want to stand up and accept some applause for all the hard work that you do. Thank you. Thank you. He is my friend and brother. We struggle through these issues every day together about what resilience means for you. We talk about ideas. We bring them into the city. He is a great representation, an exporter of ideas to the rest of the world about some of the innovative thinking that you all are already doing here. He's working across silos. He's creating and implementing a resilience strategy, which we'll talk about. He's a senior advisor to the leadership of this city. He's here to promote resilience thinking and act locally, but serve as a global thought leader. So that's very important for a place like Vejle. You in the room, maybe you should all give yourself a round of applause to you are global thought leaders in this. He is coordinating resilience efforts across government and beyond government. This involves the private sector. This involves civil society. This involves everyone just beyond the municipality. Not just the municipality. And finally, he liaises with people like myself, other CROs, and other teams that we have at 100 resilient cities to do this work. A little bit about how other cities are organizing themselves. So here are examples of 3 of our cities. How am I doing on time? Am I okay? Or speaking? Yeah? Okay. So in Rio de Janeiro, a huge urban megalopolis, enormous city that's dealing with poor and disaffected communities living in favelas and dealing with urban disaster. They have a big operation center, and they have placed their CRO in this operation center, which is monitoring various indicators and reporting to the mayor on a daily basis. New Orleans, Louisiana, a city in the United States, which many of you might know, was devastated by a hurricane, Hurricane Katrina. And we got to see live on television, for some of us, very emotionally, how certain populations were completely left to fend for themselves. This is something we got to see in person together, Jonas. And so they have created a new CRO position that's about talking and bringing in poor and disaffected communities into the governance dialogue. And finally, you might have heard of a very innovative and fancy place named Vejle, Denmark, where we call it, we go around the world, we call it the Brooklyn of Denmark. Because you are doing very innovative things. I was just touring urban farms. And we're trying to take these ideas and show the world that it's possible in a small place, and it's possible to grow it into a larger scale. And Jonas really helps me in that dialogue. So you have a very innovative committee here that's always advising him. And then we have a separate resilience committee, and he has a great staff. Just acknowledging my colleague Jeppe here from ICLI, we brought in a strategic advisor as well who helps me manage all that happens here. A little bit about our strategy process. Again, you all are already doing strategies. This is about bringing it all together and having one voice as a city. It's a 6 to 9 month process, which we're in the middle of right now here in Vejle. And it's really understanding what is happening around that wheel that I showed you before and where their gaps are, And every city has gaps. These aren't weaknesses, but it's to have an open and honest conversation of where in that wheel there is some space for discussion and to bring people in. We're here to engage a broad array of stakeholders. It's very holistic, as I talked to you before. It recognizes all the work that you are doing already. It establishes the practice and the role of the CRO in the city. And it's done with the help of a global strategy partner. Our hope is to one day back away. You know, we've made a 2-year commitment to have this position in the city. But if the people like the Honorable Deputy Mayor and others in the room feel that it is important, then the CRO position will continue long after I'm gone, Rockefeller and 100 resilient cities is gone. That's our hope. That'll be the true test of what we're trying to accomplish here. Something I talked earlier about some of our partners. We have partners in addition to our cities all around the world. I talked about trying to create a marketplace of ideas and of products. So we have signed up partners from around the world to help create tools and services to help you in this regard. It's about building a marketplace and recognizing, again, where there's a gap in the marketplace, then we can go ahead and build a tool and to try and address that. Some examples of some of our partners from around the world who have joined our platform, to the extent that there are other partners in Vejle interested in becoming a part of this platform. We welcome that as well. It's very much a living, breathing organism whereby partners offer their services to cities free of charge. We currently have 35 partners offering 45 services free of charge to cities around the world. That's an additional $100 million commitment. So in addition to the $150 million that Rockefeller is giving, these private sector organizations, academic institutions have all committed an additional $100 million. So you see that's $250 million in 1 year. So we believe in what we're doing, and we believe that's a real sign of success. A little bit about the network. This is a self-organizing network. Jonas is a part of this, one of the first members of it. We now have 67 cities around the world where they're sharing best practices every day. They're solving problems on their own. This is not about us coming in from New York and telling you how resilience is done. This is about you in Vejle telling the world what you're doing here and bringing and having an honest exchange of ideas, learning from each other, and connecting with other resilience building experts. You know, Jonas is our ambassador. We call on him to do all kinds of things. I understand you're going to Barcelona soon. He's going to other cities, and he is an ambassador, not just for Vejle, but for 100 resilient cities as well. Some things that they are actively working on in our network. We have a CRO summit every year. So the United Nations has its General Assembly, but we're trying to create this at the city level and bring all of these global thought leaders together. We just had a summit last year in New Orleans, Louisiana. We'll pick a new city every year, maybe Vejle one year. We'll have web convenings, an online community and resource bank. We have CRO-led working groups on various topics. They are gathering and self-organizing regionally as well. Congratulations, I understand that we're going to get some Horizon 2020 funding from the EU. So lots of good work happening there. And then we have a CRO network steering committee. So this is, again, it's not guided by 100 resilient cities or Rockefeller. It's self-organizing, and these people carry their own ideas forward as they see fit. That's all I wanted to share with you informally. I hope to meet everyone in the room. This is about a conversation, and I hope we have a more honest and frank conversation together in an unstructured way, because I want to hear about the ideas. I want to hear about where you want to take the city, and the rest of the world is watching you as well, as the Honorable Deputy Mayor said. So all eyes on Vejle. All of Denmark's eyes are on Vejle. All of the world's eyes are on Vejle. And congratulations to all of you, and welcome to our family. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is too loud. All right. Yeah, and also there will be the possibility of also when we have the panel debate to ask more questions. And also please, I know Mr. Vikram Singh is a very open-hearted person, so also during the breaks, please feel free also to ask questions regarding the network. Later today, we will also be presenting the ideas and how far we are with the resilience strategy process, so you will learn a bit more about that after the break. But for our next presenter, I would like to invite Mads Randbøll Wolff to come up here. Mads is the director of the Chora Connection, formerly known as Center for Sustainability and Resilience. And you also have a background in public administration and from the Nordic Council ministers in Copenhagen. And we think it's very interesting also that we have another organization working with resilience here in Denmark. So we, of course, hope to get a lot of collaboration going as well. So please.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonas. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm one of those guys from Copenhagen who have been looking at Vejle and asking the question, what's going on? I didn't call Vikram, though. I was so fortunate to have a direct contact with Jonas, and we have had some very good discussion throughout the last couple of months. And I do believe that we'll be able to do something together and bring the discussion and development on resilience to a higher level in Denmark. It is about, as Vikram said, it is about bringing people together, and it is about, what was the other thing? Sorry, my memory is short. It's about catalyzing change. That's a challenge, and that's what we need to do, and that's why my center was established. It was funded following a work throughout 4 years by a group of dedicated people who thought that we do have some fundamental problems that we need to do something about. And they did a very good work formulating an application and got the funding from the Velux Foundation. So now we can be running our business for approximately 5 years. So Chora Connection is the name. And today I'll try to speak about resiliency and responsibility, because I think that if we're not talking about responsibility, we will never get a resilient society. About Chora Connection, first of all, the name Chora, it's Greek. I guess it's only a few of you have ever heard that name before, but it's Greek, and it's one of these words describing time, space, and room. You know one of them, probably the word topos, topology, describing a specific spot on the earth. Chora, though, does not describe a specific space. It's a room, it's a mental room where you can enter, and then you can start to thinking in a different way. You can put questions on the existing values and the existing ways of doing things. So that's what we're trying to pursue, a new way of thinking and putting questions, so we'll be able to find solutions to our problems in a new way. Because we do know what the problem is, more or less. And we do know enough to act and find the solution, but it just doesn't happen. And why is that? What is it that makes us not do what we should be doing? We can find many answers for that, a culture, structure, and so on. And we'll be working with that. And that is what we want to do. We want to work within these kind of issues and translate strategies into action. And we'll facilitate new interdisciplinary and between sectors partnerships and develop new prototypes with an eye for an upscaling and long-lasting impact. We see that we do have some problems in the way we communicate and the way we meet. We don't have this platform where we speak a common language, where we understand each other no matter where, from which perspective we are talking. We often are forced to choose between a top-down perspective or a bottom-up perspective. But does that really matter? Does it matter if you are from a top-down perspective or from a bottom-up? Isn't it most important that you actually, in your work, are able to both have a top-down perspective and a bottom-up? Otherwise, what happens? We have several tons of strategies, legislation, financial instruments, and so on, coming from the top-down, trying to embrace bottom-up initiatives. We have many developments the other way, bottom-up initiatives that wants to address top-down governmental business and so on. But what happens? Top-down, bottom-up, they never meet. So we need to have a platform where we speak the same language. And the fifth square is what we call it, this kind of new platform, with a new language, with a new understanding. We also talk about inner values and outer values as opposites. We talk about the distance between central and decentral, urban, rural, short-sighted, long-term visions, and so on. Many different kind of opposites. When we are talking about them, they often just stand as an excuse of doing nothing. So we need to develop this platform where we can speak the same language and have the same kind of understandings. And that is basically, I guess, the same that Vikram is talking about. We just do need to get new thinking in the way we solve problems. So, resiliency in a municipal perspective. What does it take? Well, it is about taking responsibility for your own well-being, for your family and friends, for your community and for your neighbors, or you could say for your neighbors and community. I mean, it's all over. It's not only just around us. It's not about building fences around our society. It's about being open and being helpful and generous to help other societies and neighbors as well. And it do apply for individuals, organizations, companies, municipalities and states, and the global society, of course, as well. So, One thing, do not build chimneys. I just, when I was doing my presentation, I thought about it, because I participated in a conference a couple of weeks ago where we had a presentation, Jonas was there as well, about the big U in New York City. It's a new barrier to pretend New York City and Manhattan for flooding and so on. Quite interesting. But in fact, there was one question from the audience. Is that just a new way of building tall chimneys? I mean, you're building the chimney as tall so the smoke does not bother yourself, but it will go to the neighbors. So that is part of the responsibility. When we're designing our solutions, we have to remember that it's not just about exporting our problems. It's about solving the problems. But we're in a situation where it is difficult to take this kind of responsibility, because I would argue some of the problems are that we have a severe lack of multi-level governance. State policy, governmental legislation does not often meet local activities in the municipality and so on. The picture we have between the different layers of in the multi-level governance is that they are negotiating because they have specific different economic interests. So the organization for the municipalities in Denmark are here to defend the economic interest of the municipalities, not necessarily to defend the total positive, sustainable development of the country. But that's because they've been put into this situation. So we have the organizations of the municipalities standing to defend the rights and interests of the municipalities in front of the government. And the government, on the other hand, of course, is having their kind of economic interest that not necessarily meets the interest of the municipalities. But why is that? I mean, does the municipalities and the governments represent different people? No. It's the same. It's us. It's our community. But we are organized in a way so we build up conflicting organizations with conflicting economic interests. And that leads to a lack of multi-level governance. It leads to a lack of policy coherence. Just look at, if a lot of you are probably working in the municipalities. If you're looking in your own department and looking at the different policy goals that you're having, how are they working together with policy goals in other departments? I guess a lot of them are conflicting. At least that's what, from my point of view, I've been working in the state administration. I've seen many examples of conflicting policy goals from one ministry to another, even within ministries, conflicting policy goals. And of course, that is because we have a high degree of silo thinking. So the solution, and today we're talking about if mayors rule the world. Are mayors the solution? Well, I think they could be a part of it. They could, if they're smart and good. But there's also a danger to it. And I'm very much looking forward to the presentation of Mr. Benjamin Barber, because this is something quite interesting. And if you see what's happening on the state level, on the governmental level, do they come up with the solid, good answers on how to work with sustainability and resilience? That could be discussed. That could be argued. Does the mayors? Some does, actually, and I think what we see here in Vejle is a good example of that there are someone who takes the responsibility and who dares to pose a question on the existing way of doing things. So I think, yeah, the question, the answer partly could be mayors. Absolutely, and for sure they have a big responsibility also if we are to re-establish a proper multi-level governance system. That also, of course, takes a high degree of responsibility for the mayors. Yeah, so this is different kind of responsibilities that we have to look at in the municipal level. Of course, a responsibility for the society, not only for your own municipality, but also for the surrounding municipalities and societies. It's not okay to, I mean, you could build a tall chimney, or you can do as they did down in Kolding some years ago, building a big mall. And what was the consequence of that? I'm not coming to Kolding often, so I will not, I can't say it in detail, but anyways, I think you have clear evidence that you're attracting businesses and activities to the center, and then you're closing down the decentralized societies around the center. And that's not, in my opinion, a very responsive development. Citizenship, how to involve, engage, and empower. I think that's another big issue. I heard an interview with a Danish author last week, and she was like, oh, it's so big and so complex, I don't know what to do, and I'm just hoping that there will be a big leader showing me the way. That's a big challenge, and we can blame her and we can blame a lot of other people, but we can also blame ourselves, us who are in a position where we can work with empowerment and engagement and so on. So that's also a part of it. We'll not get a resilient society unless we have citizens that are playing along and are feeling a part of it. And then another thing, stop the competition between municipalities. I don't know how much it's going up. I remember I was born and grew up on the most eastern part of Denmark on the island of Bornholm, and I remember at that time there were 5 municipalities in this little tiny island. And they were all busy about competing against each other. So one day, one of the biggest industrial productions in one of the municipalities moved to another one because they did something about the taxes. Did the society of Bornholm develop by competing on the tax level? I don't think so. There might be some who have a different opinion, but in my mind it doesn't make sense. So stop that kind of stop that kind of competition and start to work on connections between municipalities. Grow together instead of grow apart. Okay, this is another part of the problem. Vikram, you talked about how many people will live in the urban areas, and that's true. And there's not much we can do about it, but we can do something about the relationships between urban and rural development. I think we have a problem if we're talking only about sustainable urban development, ignoring the fact that we still are depending on what's coming from the rural side. But this is a development that we have seen for the last many years. And let me explain. This curve, it's actually, even though it looks like it's hand-drawn, it's actually based on some examinations of the value creation on fish landed in Ålesund in Norway. Shows where the value creation is. This is value, this is distance. So value creation, fish landed in Ålesund, it's sold on the auction and then it's transported to the city, and it shifts hands several times before something finally reaching the consumer. But the value creation is happening in the rural area. This is the price in capital. If you can get financing or access to capital, if you're outside the urban regions or cities, it's very expensive. And the closer to the city, it's the cheaper it is. The last one is about social capital. Where do you find social capital? It's very low out here, it's high here. Of course, we have very good examples of social capital in the rural areas. But do we have social capital in a sufficient level? That's a question. So we have a development going from the decentralized rural areas to the central urban areas, where we are moving values that direction. We're not moving anything the other way. So the question is, can we do something about that? Not to stop urbanization, but to have a more balanced development between urban and rural development. So what we would like to look at is the demand that we see here in the urban regions. Can that demand be designed in a new way so it will have a positive effect on what's going on here? And to increase the value creation out here. So one thing we'll be doing, and I think is highly relevant in a resilient city context, is to look at food for cities. And we have a conference in April, 27th, 28th of April. And if you have any question regarding that, you can ask me, or you can ask Emil or Line, who's sitting on the second floor there, row. They are very much into this as well. This is about how can we design a change in the demand pattern in the cities, and then use that as making change in the rural communities. It will be a cooperation between the city of Copenhagen and the two rural communities of Bornholm and Lejre. Can we do anything about that? Tons of problems, tons of challenges, because there are different kind of regulations that would say this is a no-go. But maybe we'll be able to find some ways around these kind of barriers. At least that's our ambition. So I think this Food for the Cities, talking about the responsibility of a city in helping a more sustainable and resilient development around the countryside is very crucial. And this is something that we would also like to discuss further on with Vejle and maybe also other 100 resilient cities. You never know. Okay. I think that was the words for today, or at least for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mads. Thank you very much. Well, I just want to pick up a little bit on the narrative about exchanging ideas. I think maybe some of you are wondering where our mayor today, and actually we can tell you that we've exchanged a program for sharing ideas, but also for sharing people. So we sent 2 people to Florida, and that's our mayor and our general director. But instead we got 2 distinguished persons from the US. So that's also part of the the international collaboration. I also want to say that we're also having the opportunity to go live on a little bit of what's going on here. We've actually, for those of you who like to use Twitter, we've developed the Twitter profile and also a hashtag for Resilient Vejle. And this is also connected to the global discussion about resilient cities. So I know actually right now Vikram is calling the office in New York to help us sort of spread the word about what's happening here today. So we are sort of really going in between the local and the global, and with these new technologies as well. For our next speaker, I would like to invite Professor Henning Boje up here. I think what's really interesting about your background is what I know from you so far is that you study the philosophy of risk, which I really sort of find very interesting in terms of resilience. Just need to get you geared.
Can you hear
and
me? Thank you.
You have done some research about communities. Risk in communities, which is very interesting for what we're working here.
One of those cases.
Yes, thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I will continue on some of the themes that have been raised by the previous speakers. And I'll talk about the resilience of communities and take up one aspect that struck me when we investigated a case in northern Norway. But first I'll just bore you a bit with some definitions of resilience, and then gradually I'll crawl my way into this case. Usually people, academics, when they talk about any concepts, they look into the Oxford English Dictionary, at least if they're going to speak in English. And of course here I was actually struck, I hadn't looked this up before, that in English the term resilience, of course they say in the literal use it is a physical property. But when we talk about it with respect to communities, social constructions, it's figurative, it's a metaphor. Therefore, it's up to us how to determine what do we mean by resilience. And I was struck by the fact that it's actually used in this social form already in the 1850s. I thought it was much more recent. Of course, resilience, since I'm a philosopher also, comes from the Latin, means jumping back, resilare. So therefore, of course, the literal use is simply getting back into shape. However, there are many ways in which we can talk about that. Here's a definition that has been used quite a lot within emergency management circles, comes from the Multidisciplinary Center for Earthquake Engineering Research. So here they, they highlight the ability to absorb a shock if it occurs and to recover quickly. That's very engineering-like. That's fine, that's fair. They come from the earthquake engineering part. But when we now go to the United Nations Disaster Reduction Program, well, there we have much more of an accommodation to and recover from effects. And when we look at the, again, at this definition that they have, then they underlie that, well, we are not all equal. Some are more capable of doing that. And of course, it depends on the resources and the underlying capability they have. So it's not just a matter of capacity, but it's also the underlying ability and resources. But the adaptation part hasn't really been stressed very much by these definitions. That has come in especially from the ecological movement and from the climate adaptation. So here I grabbed a definition from the World Bank, where I have highlighted here in red the differences here, where they really want to stress that resilience, to their mind, is the same as adaptive capacity. It means taking advantage of opportunity also and to cope with the consequences. Again, they stress that adaptive capacity represents the resources available also for adaptation. I don't like very much the notion of capacity because, again, capacity has to do with amounts. It's something that you calculate in spreadsheets, etc. I rather like to talk about capabilities, but that's halfway semantics, whether we talk about a capacity or a capability. My colleagues and I have been talking a lot and working a lot with critical infrastructures lately because, and this is a blatant word from our sponsors, we are organizing a conference on critical infrastructures very soon. I have some leaflets there. And here we are also looking very much at the basic features that critical infrastructures must have in order to be resilient. So critical infrastructures are like the infrastructures that provide vital services to the community: rail, transport, communications, even food, power, water, etc. Now, when we have major disruptions of those, then there are differences in terms how fast and how efficiently they recover and adapt. We have here then I would say a slightly modified definition, which we rather prefer. That is that if we still keep with the earthquake engineering people, we still keep with them the key that it is a matter of regaining performance and services to the public, but also by reestablishing normal performance and services and adapting when relevant to new and possibly different conditions, because conditions have been changed. This is inspired very much by the climate people also, that we talk here about sudden shocks and gradual changes. As I said, we distinguish between capacities that are measured. This is the amount, the time it takes to regain performance, or how much performance you can regain, and then the capabilities that are the underlying abilities, the underlying abilities that are required, that are needed in order to demonstrate those capacities. I was inspired by reading Benjamin Barber's new book, and I'll take up here a theme that has come up very many times in Dr. Barber's distinguished work, namely inequality, fairness. And this is not a new thing. I also looked up here this book, which is more than 30 years old, namely the work on democracy. Now, this issue of feeling responsible, perception of fairness and equality, that plays a role for social cohesion, responsibility, engagement. And we can talk about this, but here I want to mention some empirical facts, namely from a case study I was involved in myself a few years ago up here in Norway. This is this is a case where we looked at the first and the northernmost exploitation of oil that was granted, that was allowed by the Norwegian Parliament in 2009. We were paid for doing this, I should say, by the large oil company called Eni. So I must declare interest here. We had an interest in that, but we were underpaid, so I'll speak for myself. So therefore, I speak for myself. They didn't have to approve it, but they were sent a copy. There's a lot of money involved in this. This costs more than 50 years of budget of Vejle. That's the exploitation, the big piece of equipment that has been, of course, drawn up in Norway, but has been constructed in South Korea. And now, with 2 years delay, it is on its way up here in the North Sea to its final destination in the Barents Sea. Now, we wanted here to find out whether the local people, the stakeholders, whether they thought the process leading to the granting of this permission, whether it was fair, not whether they agreed with it or not. And we come from risk governance, risk philosophy, emergency management. So we were very much concerned about their perception of risks. But we were out to really experience a surprise, because they weren't concerned about risks. They were concerned about the balance between risks and benefits. And they were a bit angry about that. So yeah, the process was reasonably fair, but as these 18 people told us through our interviews, they were quite dissatisfied. I should say a bit about the context here. This is way up north, and this was done in March. I must just remind you that in March, late March, the length of the day is the same as here in Denmark, as all over the world. So it was actually quite clement, the weather. However, as you can see, there was snow around. This is Honningsvåg. This is the Havøysund, and the cities here, the long-term threats they experience have to do with depopulation. They are 1/3 of the population they were 50 years ago, and you can see here, this is a picture which is about 40 years ago. They had a large fishing fleet there. Nowadays, very, very few. And to my surprise, in Honningsvåg, they had 50 workers filleting fish. But these workers didn't speak Norwegian. They were Polish workers, because the Norwegians didn't want to take this work. And there was no really interaction between the Polish workers who worked there for 2 months, went home and took care of their children and husband or wives, and then go back again. And this is my picture, actually, when I was up there. That was midday, so they are working, they are living there under quite, I would say, not so clement conditions. Now, we could distill 3 frames when we interviewed them. There was the outright rejection, but that was represented by very few, only one environmentalist and partly one fisherman. Then the civil servants, they were, as economists, they said it's a matter of balancing, it's a matter of calculation. They simply say, okay, how much do we get out of it, and how much does it cost, what are the risks? We can quantify this. And then we had the most local people, they said, we believe in the risk calculation. It's probably reasonably good. We know there's a risk. There's a risk in any case because the Russians, they transport big vessels with oil, just 20, 40 nautical miles out, so they can also break apart. So there is a risk. They know it. It's not negligible. It's something they think about, but there must be a risk-benefit balance. And this is what really dominated. That was the issue of fairness. It dominated all other concerns. Aspects relating to complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity, that didn't really matter. These were these academic titles that we put into risk governance. But no, they were talking about the lack of ripple effect, ringvirkninger. These ripples of benefits that they thought should accrue to them and which didn't show up. So this is a quote which I heard with variations, is that we bear all the risk because if we have this pollution, it comes to us. But we get very little benefit, and benefit, that's not in terms of private money, it was in terms of workplaces, and in order to prevent the depopulation. We bear all the risk, and we get so little benefit. So I'm using this case to highlight, I think, the problem in defining what is the community. I should say, actually, these small communities up there, they range from Havøysund, 1,200 people, to Honningsvåg, the Northern Ireland, 3,000 or so, Hammerfest, which is the big city with about 3,000 people. They are competing against each other, very much so, in an amicable way, but they are nevertheless competing. They saw themselves as being exposed and bearing all the risk burden of the nation of Norway, whereas the nation of Norway was just reaping the benefits. And this threatened, I would say, also the sense of community, and it was quite clear that this was their main concern. So I think that when we talk about communities and feeling engaged in your community, we must consider also risk burden, benefits, and these are the themes that have been raised by the former speakers also. Who is the community? Here in these Scandinavian countries, we talk a lot, especially Norway and Denmark, about cohesion, social cohesion, sammenhængskraft, and it has a value, but at the same time also, who is cohesing with whom? Where do you have the cohesion? So therefore, the sense of fairness I propose, the sense of fairness of risks and benefits, that is a central ingredient in the, I would say, in the conditions for resilience. So thank you very much.
See if I can get this working. All right. So thank you very much, Henning, for for showing us a little bit about the differences in your research, and also I think what we've kind of sort of established by now is that resilience is a fairly complex concept. It has to do with infrastructure, communities, urbanization, rural areas, changes in the way that people live together. It's about risk. It's about management. It's about governance. So there's a lot of things connected to this concept. And I also think that we've established the idea that we are on the brink of trying to understand what this is. It provides a new metaphor or a lens for understanding that cities, societies are now sort of moving in new and different directions, We see that there are some difficulties in between cities and the rural area. And right now we're actually sort of on the first step of a lot of changes, a lot of transformations that are happening right now. And I think it's very interesting also that we've had the opportunity to invite Dr. Benjamin Barber to come here. I would just like to introduce Mr. Barber before he joins the scene here. Benjamin Barber is a senior research scholar at the Center of Philanthropy and Civil Society of the Graduate Center in City University of New York. The president and founder of the Interdependence Movement, and Walt Whitman Professor of Political Science Emeritus from Rutgers University. Dr. Barber argues for a renewed focus on civil society and engaged citizenship as tools for building effective democracy. His current work examines the failure of nation states to address global problems and argues that cities and intercity associations are more effective at addressing shared concerns. So I think there's a lot of things that are being built right now with the international networks and the research that Mr. Barber is presenting in a few moments. So please welcome Dr. Benjamin Barber.
Good afternoon. I'm not a tech person, so Vikram said he was old. He doesn't know what old is. I'll tell him a little later. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been in Denmark for a while. I was in Aarhus yesterday, addressing folks there about some of these issues from a somewhat different context, and I think I'm supposed to be in Aalborg next week. Again, although it's very far north. And I have to go back to New York tomorrow morning, which means I have to come back next week. So we're negotiating to see if that's possible. But it's always a pleasure to be in Denmark. I'm old enough to remember Denmark's role in World War II. And I know for many of you that will seem ancient history. To me, it's not. And it's quite an extraordinary role, as you well know from your parents and grandparents. And this is a nation which has put its conscience always first and foremost. And I hope you will now do the same when it comes to issues that we're talking about now, climate change and sustainability as well. And I'd like to address the subjects that have been handled so well by the previous speakers by backing up a little bit and providing some context and reminding you of the missing element. The Rockefeller program is an extraordinary program. It's created a new global network of cities that can organize and think together about sustainability and resilience and adaptation. And that's great. And I'm going to talk about some of the other networks that are around, like ICLE and the C40 networks that are already bringing cities together to talk about climate change. But I want to focus on something that we don't talk about very much. And you didn't hear much discussion today either. The subject is power. All of what we're talking about today happens in a context of power. And there is never, ever, anywhere in physics or politics a power vacuum. There are players on the scene with agendas that have nothing to do with sustainability, adaptation, or resilience, but have to do with profit, that have to do with running a successful private business. And I can assure you that their agenda doesn't conclude any of these, but, and this is a small warning for Rockefeller, I've made it before, I love their program, but the last time I was at a conference on resilience, it was last spring in Rotterdam, and it was fully funded by Shell. And I'm going to explain why there's a reason for that. And it means that the good folks at Rockefeller and in cities like this have to know that this, as Professor Andersen said, this concept has many meanings and can be used in many ways. And I'll say quickly here and then talk about it later, I will say that to the carbon industry, resilience means don't worry about sustainability. Don't worry about climate change. Get ready to deal with the shocks of earthquake and tsunami and comets and climate change. wait a minute, there's a disjunction, is there not? The first 3 or 4 are natural disasters which every city, every civilization has to prepare to meet. The last one is a human-caused event, which means we don't have to wait and be resilient. We can try to preempt the causes that lead us to the disasters that then later on we will have to be resilient about. And to talk about that, we have to talk about politics and power, to talk about the nature of governance. And that is an absolutely crucial thing, because there are so many good people, and they start with Rockefeller, who have said we must create resilient societies because we will face all kinds of disasters. And as realists, we even have to say, given the power of the carbon industry and the failure of sustainability for 21 years in the UN COP process, we have to say probably we're going to have to deal with disasters coming from the failure of sustainability. But that doesn't mean we can replace the work of sustainability with the work of resilience. We have to first try to deal with causes, and Professor Andersen mentioned prevention. He had a list there that went from prevention down to adaptability and restoration. Prevention. And prevention is the job of politics, not just resilience. Lung cancer is a very serious problem, and a resilient approach means more hospitals, more X-ray machines, more surgeons. But how about we don't smoke? And if we don't smoke, the resilient measures are much, much less important. Indeed, they can even become unnecessary if we really had a healthy society. The first goal is a healthy city, a healthy nation, a healthy world, and make it that way. The second goal is, because we're frail, we're human, there are disasters we will face, to be resilient. Because even if we don't smoke, some people will get lung cancer. But there is a difference between saying the primary response to lung cancer should be a resilient medical strategies, and saying we will do our best to prevent all of the human causes of lung cancer, but then be ready with good medicine to deal with it. And Rockefeller is helping us respond to a world in which we know there will be political inefficiencies and political failures and disasters, even in the man-made area, not just the natural area. But we have to make that distinction. Even earthquakes. There are 2 kinds of earthquakes. The tectonic plates move, and those earthquakes will come, and there's very little we can do about it, and we need resilient strategies. And there are fracking-induced earthquakes, local earthquakes. We can be resilient about that too, or we can stop fracking as a dangerous technique that creates an earthquake-prone locality, as well as contaminating water, releasing dangerous gases, and also an awful lot of methane, which is far more dangerous than carbon emissions. So let's talk a little bit about the politics of a sustainable society and what it takes, in the hope that Judith Rudin and Vikram, after 2 years, will say, we actually don't have to put more money into resilience because we've created such a sustainable world that now we can sit back and do some serious work. What are the politics of these things? What is this about? What is the kind of world we live in? We heard a discussion from several people this morning about the division of governance levels, national, provincial, local, the competition among cities and so on. And that's a vital discussion, although it takes place without reference to the real power holders, the carbon corporate companies, the oil companies, the companies that in the private sector actually influence global decisions and often force the hand of local, national, and international authorities. But let's put that aside, because we know that's there, it has to be dealt with. How do we deal with the new problems of the 21st century that include climate change, that include terrorism, that include immigration, that include global markets? How do we deal, in other words, with an interdependent 21st century world where every problem we face is a cross-border, transnational global problem. I don't like the word globalization. On the left, some people think of it as what economic corporations do. I prefer the word interdependence, because we live on an interdependent planet where every challenge we face crosses borders, and where no challenge can be met alone, not just by cities or provinces, but not by states, not by Europe, because they are global in character. And here is the dilemma we face. And it's a profound dilemma. We live in this 21st century world of interdependent challenges, and we respond to them with 17th century territorial, sovereign, independent nation states, geared primarily to deal inside the territory of Denmark, inside the territory of Japan, inside the territory of the United States with their own problems. And for many, many centuries, that was a great solution. The nation state worked well. For most people in the last 300 or 400 years, other than when it came to war, which was, we'll put that aside because that was a rather big problem for the nation state, but when there wasn't war, in the times of peace, states dealt pretty well with all the problems of their people. And that was true right up until not so long ago, particularly in a place like the United States. When I grew up in the 1940s in New York City, my mother used to say to me, don't go to Brooklyn today. I was in Manhattan. Don't go to Brooklyn. There's a virus across the East River. You might get sick. I still live in Manhattan, but I don't worry about the Brooklyn virus. I worry about Mexican pig flu and West Nile virus and Hong Kong flu and Ebola and, of course, HIV. The global pandemics that are now every health system's concern. And the health system of the United States, a very good one like yours or a very poor one like ours, are equally susceptible to global pandemics that a good health system or a bad one can't by itself deal with. If somebody comes from Liberia with Ebola and lands here, you might have the best system in the world, but you'll find very quickly there are problems for which your system is inadequate, because it's a world without borders, policed by states with borders. But Ebola doesn't carry a passport. It doesn't stop for customs inspections. It's pretty cold here. It's very cold in New York, but we all know we live in a world of global warming where the average temperatures over the last 10 years have risen extraordinarily. But I don't think, I may be wrong, I don't think you have a problem with vile warming. That's a good thing, vile warming. Do you? How about Danish warming? European warming? New York warming? We have, I'm being cute, it's global warming. And it's a global phenomenon that we deal with globally or not at all. You might have the best solutions here, and places like Switzerland with hydro, and places like Denmark that, even though they don't use nuclear, nonetheless, I've been told, are close to, in some months, 50% of energy use from alternative energy, wind turbines, which is fabulous. So what? Unfortunately, when China and the US together are 40%, and the BRIC nations, Russia, Brazil, and others, are themselves constantly gaining and trying to develop as we did, and when for 21 years carbon emissions have been going up, up, and up, despite the very best efforts, if they call them best efforts, of the COP process and the United Nations process, which, as happened here 5 or 6 years ago, what was that, COP 15 in Copenhagen, where you invited about 185 nations. They came, they talked, and they talked, and they talked. And then after 2 weeks, they explained that their sovereignty didn't really permit them to take any meaningful action, and they all went home. But let me take that rather dismal moment to turn things and say there is an alternative. Because, as you know, along with the 200 nations that came and went, hundreds and hundreds of cities also came to Copenhagen. And they stayed, and they talked. And already, just 5 or 6 years ago, we had institutions like ICLE, the environmental organization of cities that is about 25, 27 years old. And the C40 that started under Ken Livingstone's regime in London is the C20, and Mike Bloomberg and others took up to the C40. Now it's about 68 cities working on climate change. Cities said, we don't care what states do or don't do, we've got to do something. Because first of all, 80 to 90% of cities are on water. seas, oceans, lakes, rivers, and they will be the first to experience the effects of sea rise, storm surge, all the things that we've seen, whether it's in Bangladesh or Indonesia or New Orleans or New York in Sandy, where Manhattan, lower Manhattan, was inundated, and we suddenly discovered, talk about the lack of resilience, we found out that all the hospital generators were in the basement. You know, well, how could the electricity go out in the hospitals? Well, they put them in the basement. Lower Manhattan can't flood. Are you kidding? How's that ever going to happen? So that's where resilience comes in. You put your generators up top, so if there's water. But here you have these extraordinary floods, and 90% of the world's cities are exposed. So cities need to think about this. Cities are, you notice that Rockefeller didn't follow the impossible project of 100 resilient nations, or even 100 resilient provinces, or Länder, or cantons. They picked the place where citizens are responsible, leadership is efficient, where things can happen. They picked cities, and that wasn't an accident. They picked them because cities still work. Cities are still the one place. Thank you, Professor Andersen, for showing strong democracy. 30 or 40 years ago, when I was writing about democracy, I was fairly hopeful. But increasingly, it's become clear that our developed, never mind the Arab Spring that went straight to winter without a summer, but think about the so-called developed democracies and the cynicism, the distrust, the corruption, the paralysis that has beset our governments. You're not quite as bad as we are. We live in the United States in a system where about half of the, or more of the members of Congress think their job is to make sure there is no legislation at all, whose job is to stop government, not to enable government. And that's supported by a lot of Americans. We live in a country where the trust levels in democracy have fallen below 50% for the president, not just Obama, but for Bush and previous presidents, fallen below 50% for the Supreme Court, which used to win trust levels of 70 and 80%. And for the Congress of the United States, not so long ago, this is the body elected directly by citizens. It's our most democratic body. The Congress of the United States, the House of Representatives, had a trust level of 8%. Less than 1 out of 10 of the very people who vote for them say, I vote for them, I sure as hell don't trust them. And that's a sad comment because, of course, it's not just a comment on the Congress, it's a comment on citizenship. It says citizenship doesn't work, voting doesn't work. No wonder half of America doesn't vote. People are dying in some countries to get the vote. And where we have it, so often we don't use it. Not because just complacency or boredom, but because a lot of young people, a lot of immigrants, you have that problem here, a lot of people of color say, this isn't our democracy, we are not citizens. And they stop voting. So trust levels in national governments are way down, and this is true in India, and it's true all over the world. This isn't just the United States, it's true in Mexico. But the one place where trust persists is when you ask people, well, how about your mayors? How about your city councilors? And there, whether it's Germany or Mexico or the United States, or I would imagine here in Denmark too, you can tell me if I'm wrong, when you ask, what about the mayor? They say, oh, he's okay, I trust him. Democracy sort of works locally. He's my neighbor. I see him in the restaurants. I see him in the mall. Yesterday in Aarhus, I went over to the Vestmarkt, which is the immigrant marketplace just beyond the peripherique there, the outer ring. And I talked to quite a lot of people there, chatted with them in English, not Danish, not because I don't speak Danish, I don't, but because they much preferred to speak English. That's interesting, isn't it? To speaking Danish. I was with a Danish colleague, and they didn't want to speak to the Danish colleague. They were happy to speak, from New York, okay. Let's talk. So that, that's interesting in itself. But over there, even those folks said, but the mayor's good. He comes over here every weekend, he shops, and he set up a small office in this part of town. So even in the distrustful and more cynical immigrant community that doesn't feel Denmark is their country yet, and you need to find ways to make that happen, people still say, yeah, but in the local government, the mayor, city councilors, I get that. They're with us, they're neighbors, they're about us. So trust levels in cities are high. Democracy still works in cities. You all know ideas like participatory voting, participatory zoning and participatory budgeting, which came from Latin America, out of Porto Alegre, and today in cities all over the world, and New York has some, Paris has some, where you say the most important sign of political authority is spending money. We'll give some of that right to citizens. We'll give it back to the citizens who voted for us. Let them decide how to spend the money, whether to build a park or a school or put an intersection with a traffic light here or there. And that empowerment of citizens is part of the trust. And of course, mayors are locals. I worked for Bill Clinton for 5 years. I never went to the White House without about 2 hours to spare for security. They didn't make me take all my clothes off, thank God. But the searches I went through, every time I was there, even though I was well known to them because I went regularly as an advisor, were extraordinary. And when I met with the president of Germany a number of times, and when I met with other presidents, prime ministers around the world, there were always people taking my cell phone, searching me, metal detectors. But whenever I meet with the mayor, I had dinner with the mayor of Aarhus last night, and Jacob he walked in, and I said, gee, where are your guards? Where's the police cars? Of course, there are none. But the same is true of de Blasio. You go see de Blasio, there may be one cop hanging out in the background, talking like this into his sleeve. But for the most part, mayors are the same way. I think the mayor of Vejle is Singh later, today or tomorrow. He's in Los Angeles, I think, as well as Florida. When you go see Mayor Garcetti, you just walk in the door and sit down and talk with him. That's a difference between mayors and prime ministers. They are locals. In the English lingo, they are homies, homeboys, homegirls. They're from the neighborhood. Ed Koch used to walk around New York and say, how am I doing? The mayor of New York, how am I doing? Imagine Obama or Val or Cameron walking around London or Paris saying, how am I doing? And the Secret Service wouldn't let them. And if they did, they wouldn't want to hear the answer. So that intimacy, that sense of neighborliness that defines the city is core. The city is where there's still some faith in democracy, still some trust that the system can work. And there is a very good reason for that, because in the city, the real functions of government are still exercised. If you will go to Washington, if you go to Paris, if you go to London, if you go to Tokyo and listen to the debates, you would think we lived in the 19th century and the question is big government or little government, capitalism or proletariat, unions or the private market sector. There are ancient quarrels about capitalism and so forth that have very little to do with a 21st century service, knowledge, interdependent global economy. And you ask a computer guy, a programmer, so are you a worker or a capitalist? You even ask someone in the service industry who answers phones in Bangalore for a business in Texas. Are you a capitalist or a worker? They say, I don't know, I'm a communications person. I'm part of a global communications network. Those old terms don't work very well. And yesterday I sat in Aarhus with a couple of hundred people in a room like this, almost all of whom were in business. But they didn't say, I'm the private sector and we're here to address and talk to the public sector to govern. They said, we're citizens of Aarhus and we're trying to figure out how to work with the mayor and civil society and make things work. That's how cities work. And I think that's probably why Rockefeller's in cities and not in other levels of government. Because in fact, I hate that levels of government talk. I was a year ago in Brussels with Commissioner Hahn, who is the commissioner of the regions and the cities. And he was saying to some mayors who Juan Clos had brought into the room, he was saying, I want to tell you, we here in Brussels are the highest level of European governance and administration, and the regions are a next level. But I want to say, I think cities are an important level of governance, he said. And I was on the podium with him, and I had to stop him. I'm saying, excuse me, Commissioner, cities are not a level of governance. Cities are the quintessential human community. They define us as social beings, as human beings. They're where we're born, where we grow up, where we're educated, where we marry, where we work and we play and we pray, where we get old and where we die. And when I've been here for a couple of days talking to different people, I say, where are you from? They don't say, I'm from Denmark or I'm from Europe. They say I'm from Odense. I'm from Aarhus. I'm from Copenhagen. They define themselves. And where are your parents? Oh, they're over next door in Vejle. Cities are how we define our communities. Cities are how we understand who we are. Cities are where we get our identity from. And by the way, cities are much older than any of the states they belong to. Alexandria is much older than Egypt, Damascus older than Syria, Paris older than France, Boston older than the United States. Cities go all the way back. It's where human communities started. And we know Athens is the kind of quintessential first democratic polis, not very democratic, but a little more democratic, at least, 10 or 20% of the population had citizenship, not women. And they had the same immigrant problem that we have today. They didn't know what to do with their immigrants, but still, it was sort of a democracy. The cities are where civilization is born, where democracy is born, where we cultivate our sociability. And when Aristotle says, we are a zoon politikon, a political animal, he's talking about the polis, the political. We're people of the polis. We like cities. One of the speakers said, I know sort of by mistake, well, urbanization is a fact and we can't do much about it. That sounds like it's a disease. But urbanization isn't a disease. Urbanization is the central human movement. To be together, to be social. Density, creativity, entrepreneurship, living side by side, working and living in the same place, being with our fellow people. And by the way, also multiculturalism and diversity. That goes all the way back. Athens was far more multicultural than Persia as an empire back then. You were in Persia, you were Persian. If you were in Athens, God knows who you were. You might be from Rome, you might be from the Gothic North, you might be from down Africa in the Mediterranean. Cities are, again, essentially multicultural. And we know that they are far more multicultural than the nations to which they belong. Nations are monocultural. The Japanese nation, the French nation, the Danish nation. And that's where we get in trouble, around our nationalities, which are actually invented identities. You think, well, Denmark, that's a very old notion. Actually, it's not. Nor is France, nor is England. They're all invented identities. But the local identity of the city is real and diverse and manifest, which is why I think cities are better situated, difficult as it is for them, to deal with the challenges of integration and multiculturalism. Nations don't do it very well. France talks about laïcité, which, though it sounds very nice, like some secular neutrality, is actually an imposed framework which to people who are religious feels like a different religion being pushed down their throats. And if you don't understand how laïcité feels to a Muslim from Algeria or Morocco or Tunisia who's living in Paris, go talk to them. Because these national norms are much tougher, but in the city, it's different. Because in the city, we encounter each other every day. You shop with someone, and you say, oh, I didn't see you, the other day. Oh, I was at the mosque. Oh, that's right. You go to the mosque on a different day than we go to church or we go to the synagogue. People understand because they're neighbors what religion feels like in different places. When they are neighbors, when you don't shove a migrant population into a ghetto and never let them be part of the rest of the place. So the multicultural diversity of cities is one of their greatest strengths. And by the way, mayors have to deal with that. In the United States, there are 12 million people from Latin America who are there without visas, who crossed, and who are technically illegal. And the U.S. Immigration Service says they're illegal, and if we find you, we will deport you. We hope we don't find you, though, because we don't really want to deal with it. But Mayor de Blasio and Mayor Garcetti, Mayor Emanuel of Chicago, say, I don't know if they're legal or illegal, but I'll tell you this, they're here. And they're driving cars, and their kids go to school, and they're using the emergency room, and they have jobs. So we can either pretend they're invisible, in which case it's impossible to know who they are, what they're doing. It's impossible to control crime or drugs. Or we can say, you too are a citizen at least of the city, and give them their urban visa, their civic ID. In Hamburg, Mayor Olaf Scholz has said to everyone who lives there, you come to my office, you register. I'm not going to ask you if you have a Schengen visa or not. If you're living in Hamburg, you are a citizen of Hamburg. If you register, don't get in trouble. Let us know where you are. will make sure you can drive, work, go to hospitals, and live a decent life. Because cities aren't in the privileged position of having those kind of borders. The borders are somewhere else. They can't control those. They can only say people are here. And in the new interdependent world of the 21st century, those immigrants, in fact, mostly are following the logic of the global economy, which doesn't know any borders. They go where the jobs are. Of course they do. It's not just Mexicans coming to the United States. Guatemalans go into Mexico. It's not just Moroccans coming into Spain and on into the Schengen countries. It's sub-Saharans going into Morocco, looking for jobs in Morocco, not to go on to Europe necessarily. Because we cross borders in a world of economics without borders, but still live in states that go on and on about their borders. So cities are good at interdependence. Cities are good at diversity. Cities are good at working together. And here let me directly address that question that was asked earlier. Yeah, but cities compete with one another and, you know, they have their local parochial interests. They don't sort of maybe get the bigger problems. I honestly don't think that's true for two reasons. One, if you think about it, the interests of cities in dealing with issues of labor migration, in dealing with issues of universal banks that fail, in dealing with issues of inequality, in dealing with issues of technology, in dealing with issues of pandemic disease, and certainly in dealing with climate change, are dealing with global issues. Local public goods are global goods. They're the same thing. It's actually nations that don't. Nations are the parochial institutions of the 21st century, and cities, which we used to see as parochial and local, are actually much more universal and cosmopolitan. I love that word cosmopolitan because polis is in it. The polis has become the cosmopolis, and cities do get that. And that's why I think, again, Rockefeller has done such a brilliant job getting cities together in a cosmopolitan way because they were already together. You didn't actually have to assemble them. You only had to say, we're going to help you have the officers and the people that allow that to happen. And it's been happening for a long time. ICLE, C40, I mentioned. UCLG. Who here knows what the UCLG is? Yeah, it's the most important organization in the world nobody's ever heard of. If I said, who knows what the UN is or the International Monetary, everyone said, oh, I know. But it's United Cities and Local Governments. And it is an organization that began in an earlier form right after World War I when two 19th century European leagues of cities came together. And today it's global. It's mainly information sharing. It's quite administrative. It doesn't really do vital political work. It's not really concerned with power. It's been around for a long time. But it's out there. It's been there for a long time. And it suggests that cities not only can rule the world, but in some ways they already are. In soft power, not hard power, not command and control, but through their influence, through what they do together, through their capacity to solve problems together. And when it comes to competition, sure, cities compete, but they also cooperate brilliantly. People say to me, well, you talk about Sparta and Athens. What about the Peloponnesian War that went on and on and on? And I said, you're right, but what about the Mediterranean League of Cities? Oh, what was that? That was actually a league of Mediterranean cities that persisted for 2 or 3 centuries before Christ, in which those cities in ordinary times cooperated economically and all kinds of other ways. Well, what about Europe and all the wars here? How about the Hansa? Right, in the 10th and 11th century. The cities up and down from London all the way up to what was then Russia. And I think Vejle was a member of Hansa. Gdansk, all along. Cities cooperate. You say, well, wait a minute, they're all ports. They're competing. No, they're not competing. A port doesn't compete with another port. One port, what's it going to do? Send ships where? You need a lot of ports. You need a robust and safe port system for a global transportation and trade system. So ports need each other, and they use each other. And you want to talk about competition of cities as compared to what? Think of nations. When Germany gets bigger, Denmark gets smaller, or maybe Poland, or maybe Belgium. But Hamburg and Copenhagen can both flourish together and do. Warsaw and Berlin can both flourish together. Great opera companies, great trade, great exchanges, great cities. Cities don't push against each other the way nations do. Cities don't have armies and navies to make war on each other when they can't reach a trade agreement. They've got to figure out how to do it. Cities are naturally cooperative. And I suspect, Vikram, that's why you look to cities to say, let's try to do it in the cities, not in the states, because that's where it happens. But now I want to come back to my subject of power and say, this is great that cities cooperate and share best practices, and there are dozens and dozens of inner-city organizations, particularly in Europe, or Energy Cities Europe and Eurocities and many, many other organizations. EFUS, the European Forum on Urban Security, are all organizations that allow cooperation among cities. But what is still missing, these are still kind of best practice sharing, information sharing, goodwill sharing. But what about the power? And what about the problem that several people rightly put of the fact that cities often have responsibilities, but they don't have the resources to discharge their responsibilities? There's a lot of talk this morning, and I love it, about responsibility, but responsibility without the power to execute is a fraud, and it makes people distrust responsibility. If you tell anyone who has children, you lecture your children about responsibility, and they say, okay, so then give me some decision-making power. Let me make, oh no, you can't do that. Same thing with citizens. You can't tell citizens to be responsible and then give them no power. You can't tell cities to be responsible and give them no power. There's actually a word for it in political science. It's a great word. When you give a city responsibilities, or when they take responsibilities but don't have the resources, it's called an unfunded mandate. You tell them what to do, but you don't give them the dough to do it. It doesn't work. But you know what? Cities don't have to wait to be given the dollars, because cities around the world today produce over 80% of global GDP. Wealth comes from cities. Of course it does. So do patents. 96% of patents come from cities. Almost all the world's universities are in cities. All of culture is in cities, and a lot of the businesses in cities. Of course they produce the wealth. Not that agriculture isn't important, not that mining and extraction industries, there are other things that are important, but measured by the standard economic measures, cities create the wealth. Why don't they have it to deal with their problems? Because they pay it out in taxes to the provinces and to the nation, and in Europe to the European level. And then they have to go hat in hand and beg, please, can I have some back, sir? Because I've got some problems. Never forget it's your money. Not the government of Copenhagen, not the government of Brussels. And it's a good thing that you help support the very vital services that Denmark and Europe provide. But when they begin to act like it's their money, not yours, they produce the wealth and they're going to give you a handout, you need to say, excuse me, that's our wealth, and we have a right to enough of it to do what we want to do. And the same thing happens if you say, we are going to deal with climate change, for example, as some American cities have done, we are going to ban fracking, and the national government says, you can't do that. And that's happened in the United States. And I believe that cities have not only the responsibility to govern themselves, I believe they have a right to do so. And that cities ought to use rights language, not just need language or wouldn't it be nice language about what they do. This is the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. Go back and read it. The rights of cities are one of the things that is recognized in Magna Carta. Go back and look at the subsidiarity charters for Europe. And it doesn't just say cities are one-level administration. It says they have some rights. Go back and look at the 10th Amendment in the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It says, powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved constitutionally to the states and localities. That is a platform on which cities can demand rights and self-governance, not one to say, oh, please, can we try to do something? So when we ask cities, as Rockefeller is doing, to take a deep responsibility for resilience, and I hope the next project will be sustainable cities at Rockefeller, where we get involved at the front end and try to deal with the problems that will later cause a need for resilience. But when they do it, they have to know they have the right to self-governance. People always now say, 3 or 4 years ago, the UN announced the majority of the world's population live in cities. It's more and more. That also affords a democratic right to cities. You want to talk about democracy? Cities are in the majority. Let's talk about simple majority rule. Why do cities have to pass their democratic authority through all these upper governing levels that filter them down and say, no, in America, the 2% of farmers who are left, it used to be 80%. In 1830, 80% of Americans were farmers. Today, it's 2%. The 2% still control the Congress. How is that? And cities are often prevented, whether with guns or climate control or fracking, prevented from doing things by a small minority. We need to write that. Cities need to talk about their rights. And when it comes to these issues of sustainability, where they also have created 80% of emissions, it's time for cities to say, it's our responsibility, it's our right, and we need the power and the resources to do it, and we need to do that together. And this is the final thing I want to say. Because one of the problems cities have is that when they act, they tend to act alone. And they come up against the government and say, it's our right for this and that. And the government says, well, or business, corporation. Come with a corporation, and the corporation says, well, if you don't want to play ball with me, you don't want to do it here, I'll go down to Aarhus. And if Aarhus doesn't do it, I'll go across to Göteborg. Or I'll go down to Hamburg. Oh, well then, Mr. Corporation, please come here and we'll give you a lot of tax subsidies and so on. Because cities don't act together. We had that problem in the 19th century with workers. If I was a capitalist, I'll use those old images for a minute. I said, I'm going to hire you, and you'll say, you're not paying me enough. I said, okay, how about you? I'll hire you. Will you take that? You don't want it either. How about you? I'm sure you'll take it. And at some point, somebody says, well, I'll take it. I'm desperate. But then the three of you get together and say, whoa, wait a minute. Let's make a union, a syndicate. And then go back and say, you hire any of us, you pay us well, or you get nobody. Cities need that principle. Cities have to understand if they are going to take on the responsibilities and have the power and right to solve their problems, they have to do it together. That's why 100 resilient cities are much better than 1 resilient cities, and why 1,000 sustainable cities will be much better than 1 sustainable cities. And to do that, we need formal organizations, not just soft organizations of cooperation and information exchange, but a political organization. And that's why in the last chapter of If Mayors Ruled the World, I proposed a global parliament of mayors with legislative powers that would allow cities to take action together and agree to the cities who aren't there to opt in for it, and to use their common power to make sure that they could do that. And I'm very happy to tell you that in the last 2 years we have been working with many, many different partners, and we now can say that in October in London and Bristol, the first inaugural meeting, not of another conference, but of a parliament of mayors with about 100 to 120 cities from all 5 continents, cities like Rio and Tijuana and Boston and Seattle and Warsaw and Rome and Athens and Palermo and Singapore and Lusaka and Cape Town and Christchurch will be coming together just the way the resilient cities coming together, but they will be represented by their mayors, who will come together to see what they can do collectively when they pool their power. The new European community worked because the nations agreed to pool their sovereignty. Cities need to pool their resources and collective interests and power and work together. And when they do, representing the majority of the world's population and 80% of its resources, they can and will solve problems that states no longer solve. The issue on the agenda for the first Mayor's Parliament in October will be climate change and sustainability. In part because 2 months later in Paris, we know COP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 19, 20, 21 will meet. 21 years the UN has been trying to do something with very good will about climate change, and for 21 years it's been thwarted by the member states. I believe they will do something in December because they can't afford to do nothing, but I believe what they do will be wholly insufficient to the dangers we face. And we want cities to be there and the global mayor of parliament to be there and say 2 things. 1, here's what we've done, what are you going to do? But more importantly, to say, whatever you do, here's what we are doing. And we will do it. And we've got 120 cities there, and we have 1,000 more cities committed to the principle, and we will act. And if you try to thwart us, we will try to act together to resist that, because this is the new rights fight in the 21st century, the right of the majority living in cities that share the global interests and global public goods that every people face, city by city by city. And when they act together and when they do it together, they have a rich possibility. So in a way, it takes the idea of ICLEI and C40 and resilient cities, also important. It says, let's empower them. Let's take them out of the climate silo and say they can deal with anything they want because they are a governance body. And we all know the problems of integration. We have them everywhere. Imagine what cities might do if they can work together on issues of migration and take the power away from the bordered states to try to do it. Imagine what cities can do if they work together on health pandemics. Imagine what they can do when they deal with the new technologies that are international, interglobal in character. If they begin to approach and use those technologies, we are working with communication companies to try to get a digital platform, because you might say, how are you going to get 60,000 mayors in one room? How are you going to get 100 mayors every 3 months? Because the mayor will tell you, I can't leave my home, I can't leave Aarhus or Vejle every couple months and go to Tunis or Dubai. You know, they'll run me out of office. You'll do it by sitting in front of a screen like this in your office with 300 other mayors in a new, nuanced platform that allows deliberation and decision-making by mayors, and then allows others to opt in, and maybe regional groups to do it, and then come together globally. Use the technology to allow cities to do what they do so well, cooperate around their common interests that are global public interests, and assert again the public interest against private interest. Capitalism is an extraordinary system of wealth production. It works best when it's democratically regulated. But the dilemma is it constantly tries to throw off the regulation. And it doesn't just create problems for democracy, it creates problems for capitalism when it does that, because then it tends towards what? In the no jobs, because you don't need jobs in the new economy. It tends towards monopoly and not competition. It speaks about competition, but left to its own devices, it moves to monopoly. It's the state, it's the public sector that guarantees real competition, not the private sector. So we need that balance. We need cities to assert that power. We need them to do it together. And that is the promise of a global parliament of mayors. And I think over time, with a new and fresh governance organization that promises to young people and immigrants that maybe their voices can be heard, and maybe at some level democracy can work locally and globally, we will have a chance not just for a resilient planet, which God knows we need, but for a sustainable and for a just planet. Thank you very much.
Invite the 3 other speakers from this morning to join us here. All right, thank you very much for setting this scene for this interesting talk. Just need Mr. Vikram Singh here. Yeah, we've been around a lot of topics this afternoon, talking about the future of cities, sustainability, new types of governance, democracy, power, climate change, risk. I think, you know, a lot of hot topics that are really happening at the moment. And, you know, from a perspective here in Denmark, you know, we're a fairly resilient society. We're, you know, among the happiest people in the world. So, you know, my first question to you is actually, what, you know, why bother? You know, how are these topics really going to affect the future of cities in the Nordic country and Vejle? Here's the mic. So that would be my first question to you. I don't know if any of you will have the idea of dropping in. I know, Vikram, you have an idea about, yeah.
I can take this off then. Let me just pause. This is a life moment for me. I'm sharing a sofa with Dr. Benjamin Barber, so I'm having a colleague of mine take a picture. So I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to be sitting next to him. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, I don't live here, so I don't want to preempt my colleagues who obviously live here, and Dr. Barber, who is a global thought leader as well. I can just speak concretely a little bit about what we are finding in our work at 100 Resilient Cities, is that people don't feel connected to where they live. For various reasons, particularly in Nordic countries, people have always looked to the state as a monolithic answer to all of their problems. And that is now becoming under strain for various reasons, economic, socio-cultural. And so it's about tying people back to their cities, tying people so we can have a conversation about bridges, we can have a conversation about rising sea levels, but it's about tying people to each other and tying people back to the hard assets that make their cities. So let me pause there and yield to the experts and global thought leaders.
Well, maybe we should ask the question, why is it that there are so many people not borrowing? I just heard some figures this morning that throughout the last 2,000 years, or within the last 10 years, we have produced 25% of the total production, accounting for the last 2,000 years. We have been producing and we have been consuming in an extremely degree for the last 10, 20 years. And that might be having that kind of effect that we're not facing the real challenges, because, I mean, what's the problem? We have a good life, we can buy, we can consume and so on. So maybe we don't face the real problems because we just have endless numbers of goods and it's going fine. But I think there are so many evidence that actually we are challenged, and we need to stop consuming and stop thinking and acting more.
Yes, so also what you're calling for is maybe a higher level of, you might say, global ethics. I think that's, what we've heard doing sort of presentations today, not building the chimney here in Vejle, but actually sort of engaging more in issues that are related to the problems that other cities are also facing.
Yeah, and also look at economy as a ethical question, rather a value creation question rather than a mathematical question. This is about values, and maybe we have forgotten all our values because of the consumerism that has taken over.
Yeah. But how about the another?
I want to say one thing, because we have a tendency to think that being a good citizen and being ethical is altruistic, and being kind of taking care of yourself and your community is selfish. And I want to get away from that paradigm, because it's not the ethical, it's the facts of interdependence that are being missed. In a rising there are a lot of people in New York City who thought, New Orleans, well, it's on the Gulf, they have hurricanes down there, no problem for us. And then we had the storm surge of Sandy right up into Manhattan. And some very complacent people and some very wealthy people and people who thought they would never be victims, they suddenly understood the concept of interdependence. They understood that their behaviors had consequences that they would have to pay for themselves. So when we say, you should be ethical and you should think about others and you should be an altruist, no. Think about yourself, but think about yourself and your family and your neighborhood in an interdependent world where what happens in your neighborhood is going to be deeply affected by things far away. We've seen that with integration too. A lot of people live here away from the places where immigrants live, but suddenly we see in Copenhagen, or we see in Paris, or we see in Madrid, we suddenly see that ordinary people who think life is going fine suddenly have a bomb blow up in their face for reasons that seem obscene and horrible, but which actually go back to issues that they've been not dealing with. So it's the reality of interdependence that compels us, I think, to have a different perspective, and one much more friendly to sustainability and justice and resilience than it is that we have to somehow say, I'm going to be a good citizen, I'm going to be a good person for a while, and take care of those who are less fortunate than myself.
Fascinating, and let me just build on that to say, and to ground it again about what our work, our strategy work is finding here in Vejle. I want to qualify my earlier remarks that this is a smaller place and an innovative place, but what we're finding here too is that it's a complex place. It's a relatively small place, but we can talk about the basic level of services and healthcare and all those things. And maybe Jonas, you want to share a couple words about this, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface in a place like Vejle. There's a lot of conversations happening. There's a lot of problems, and I'll speak very frankly with you about that as well. Let me pause there, maybe let Jonas speak a little bit about that, but it's about trying to highlight that and bring that out in an open conversation in a safe space, which I hope we're gathered in today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, but I think, that the things that are, at our concern is, of course, that, how can we keep up such a beautiful welfare society in sort of the realities that you are describing? I think that's one of the issues that are very important to us. And also, how do we turn the challenges into new opportunities? Because I think for us here, we very much consider resilience as a kind of a dynamic concept. So instead of just looking at sort of the challenges as perils that we need to build fences against, how can we actually turn these challenges into new opportunities? How can we actually use that as a way of developing a new type of city? Working with these elements sort of in a very innovative and dynamic way. So these are the things that are at our concern, but also inspiring us, making us curious, and so forth. So yeah.
Yes, I think we should forget about this happiness stuff. I'm deeply embarrassed when I come to Copenhagen Airport. There's this big poster saying, "Welcome to the happiest people in the world." Oh, I really hope we get down to number 2 or 3. It's embarrassing, it's silly. And there was actually a very funny article in the British Medical Journal's Christmas issue, which is also always very spoofy. They said, there was a Norwegian doctor who said, "Of course they are happy, they have so little ambition." So of course it's very easy to achieve what they want. They want so little. No, I think one of the big assets, large assets, is the level of trust. It just so happens that we have great levels of trust. And we must cherish this, we must build on that, and we must engage those who feel outside. We have also a debate actually here in Denmark. That's about the outskirts, udkantsområder. That's actually also people who are outside the cities, so who also feel left out and who are impoverished in many ways. We also want to include those. And I'm not so sure about this I'm not so sure that competition doesn't exist. Competition can be healthy and very good, and it can actually engender a lot of creativity. But I think the trust is a feature that we really must try to build upon and reinforce.
Yeah.
Of course, cities are competitive, and not all of it is wholly healthy, but on the whole, when cities compete, they don't deploy armies across borders with one another, and that's a great virtue. Believe me, if you look at the history of Europe, that's really important. So we don't want to forget that. We don't want to forget that.
Thank you. I think maybe there is a time also for a few questions from the audience. Yeah. Here you go.
So for Midgard, just adding to the happiness, we're also the most medicated people and happy pills in the nation. So that's doping, you could say. So that weighs in. No, for the question, I was in Copenhagen, and a famous city planner out of Toronto, Brent Darian, attacked the Copenhagen approach for being all about climate adaptation and not enough about mitigation and real sustainability. So I would just like to a little more reflection upon, are we fixing problems at the root cause, or are we dealing with crisis management?
Any of you?
Well, I do hope we are fixing problems at the root cause, but I think we have a lot of issues going on where we are just replacing bits of entire processes. So we are optimizing on parts of the value chain, but not the entire value chain. So we're not, for instance, we have a debate on, that's not concerning cities, but that concerning pork production or husbandry production. We're talking about the problems caused by unsustainable protein or soybean production. And in order to solve that problem, instead of looking at, well, the problem is that we're importing such amount of soybeans instead of, and then doing something else, But what the reaction is often from the green organizations is that, okay, well, if that's a problem, we just have to certify the soybean productions in South America. In my opinion, that's not to solve the problem. That's just to put a band-aid on the problem. So I think you have a point there. We are not going down beneath to find the real problem, but just trying to replace bits and parts of the problem.
Just one thing about that, you know, my colleague is using the term problem, and I threw up a slide there, and I don't want to sound doom and gloom, as they say, or overly pessimistic. We know a problem will come, whether it's chronic stress, which my colleagues have talked about, or an acute shock of some kind, it will come. The question is, you can talk about mitigation or disaster risk and all of those things. If a city has done its homework, it will be ready, no matter how it comes. Whether it's through climate, whether it's through something seismic, whatever. But it's our belief is that if you have an honest dialogue and are prepared, as Dr. Barber said, we can talk about being resilient today, or we can begin to preempt a lot of these things. That's what it is. It's about an honest dialogue and doing your homework up front.
Yes, I'll just stand up so I can see you. My name is Mads Bo Christensen, and I would like to ask Benedict Barber about education. How do you see the role of education in your thoughts on, for example, interdependence? How do we teach kids to be aware of interdependence?
Let me say two things. The first thing is, let me say the cliche that we all say, and I'll say it again. Education is at the core of all things, very important. We have to have education, very good for everybody. But we've got a lot of education in a lot of societies, and it hasn't stopped, for example, well-educated young Muslim women from going back to Syria to become suicide bombers. These are not ignorant, foolish girls in many cases. These are girls who have had an education. Many of the people who turn their back against doing anything about climate change are not the climate deniers who need some education, but people who believe in that climate change is happening and frankly don't simply want to do very much about it because they have other things they want to do. So yes, of course education is important, and education and interdependence is important, but education is one thing, political will and the will of citizens is another. And again, I come back to the power issue. Knowing things doesn't necessarily make you do things. It's having values and purposes collectively with others that brings you to action. So the question is not just how do we educate people to understand what's necessary, how do we give them the will? How do they acquire the will to do those things? And while I have the mic, let me, because I know the other question somebody asked us, what about the people who don't live in cities, the people outside? And isn't, if mayors rule the world, a claim that they don't need to govern? Well, there's two things. One, the fact is the countryside rules most cities in France and the United States already, and it has for a long time. We need to right the balance. But the reality is cities is a narrow concept. If I had my way, I would have named the book not If Cities Rule the World or Mayors, but If Metro Regions Rule the World. The great new concept that I really love is the metro region, with an old city core at the center, with banlieue, with suburban areas around it, and beyond that, the countryside that, as in the Middle Ages, again today is often an agricultural place that services the city. My wife, we eat in New York only from the Hudson Valley, because there are a lot of farmers who come into New York. So New York City is the greater metro region, and we need those metro regions. Some of you know that Matteo Renzi, the mayor of Florence, when he became prime minister about a year ago, the first thing he did, because he was a mayor, was to say, we need a Senate that does not represent the old 15 or 16 provinces. We need to organize Italy around its metro regions, cities, suburbs, and the agricultural zones around them, Milano and Bologna and Rome and Palermo and so forth, and he's done that. And the Senate has actually been, I think they wanted me to stop talking. That's a good one. But they've actually done the metro region approach. They've rewritten the Constitution. Paris, which has such a problem with the banlieue, which are poor, it used to be the Communist Party and the working class, today it's immigrants. put the alienated in the banlieue, and maybe that tells you something about the banlieue making the alienated. But there's a new plan, and Mayor Hidalgo borrowed it from Sarkozy and is pursuing it to create a new metro region of Paris and its suburbs and some of the land beyond. And it's called Grand Métropole Paris, and it's really an attempt to create a metropolitan region. So one way to deal with this is to really create organic, larger metropolitan regions, so you have not just a resilient city, but a resilient metro region that includes the outlying areas. And if you divide the world into metro regions, that actually covers not 75% of the population, it covers almost everybody.
Great, thank you. Just before the break, a 10-second recommendation for, Vejle wanting to become a, future resilient city, or as well a type of city that you're describing here. What should be the first thing that we should do?
Define the larger metropolitan area of Vejle.
Okay.
Engage your small towns around it. Mm-hmm. When you drive through them, you see all the stores are closed. People feel left out.
Yeah.
Engage them, because you have, after we had the municipal reform in Denmark, all these small towns became merged into the larger town, and you could be the first to do so successfully.
Thank you. Mads?
Well, that was my point. No, I like that. Also, the talk about metro regions, but even though it might be difficult to attach to most regions in Denmark, because, they're not that big. But anyways, the connection between a city and the surrounding areas is very interesting. I think it's about creating balance between cities and rural areas.
So is it more highways, or?
Pardon?
Is it more highways? Or
highways, no. I think that the highways that we're building on now are just giving people a chance to get away from the rural area with high speed.
Okay. First thing to do.
Everything that my colleagues have said before me is also important, but just to back up to Vejle, you have a real chance to change the discourse in Denmark and in Scandinavia. This small place. You have a real opportunity to show the value of what a CRO can do, and we want this idea to grow. I don't want Copenhagen to call and say, we want to be a part of your program. Copenhagen should just see the value in it and appoint their own CRO. So by creating a national network, to some degree a regional network, to show the value in the work that you are doing, would be a very powerful signal to the world.
Well, I could just say, buy my book, but I'm not going to. But honestly, don't wait, and this is, you're already here, but to people generally, don't wait for a foundation to become a resilient city and a sustainable city. Don't wait for someone to give you a grant to do it. It doesn't require a grant. This is a wonderful program that shows how it's done, but you don't need the grant. Do it, and make sure you reward and don't penalize your mayor when she travels abroad to other things and shares, when she joins the Global Parliament of Mayors. Right now, the hardest problem we have at the Global Parliament of Mayors is that mayors have said, if I come to your meeting in London and Bristol, I may lose the next election, because they'll say, why aren't you in the city governing? Prove to your mayor that you want the mayor to cooperate across the world, and that will improve governance in your city.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nu tager vi lige en kvarters pause, og der er lidt kaffe og forfriskninger herude foran, og så ses vi til anden halvleg. Sidste ned på pladserne. Der skulle gerne være kommet lidt vand rundt her i pausen også, så der er lidt til at forfriske med. Yes. Så er vi ved at være klar til anden halvleg. Man må jo sige, det er jo virkelig noget af et ansvar, der ligger foran os. Med, det udgangspunkt, vi har drøftet her i den første del. Der skulle heller ikke være nogen tvivl om, at vi er på vej ind, kan man sige, en æra, som er spændende og fuld af rigtig mange muligheder. Og jeg synes heller ikke, der er nogen tvivl om, at Vejle, hvad skal man sige, er et helt rigtigt sted at starte med rigtig mange af de her ting. Og i den næste halvleg her, der vil vi prøve at give jer nogle eksempler på, hvad sker der her? Hvad er det for nogle ting, vi har i gang i? Hvor er vores by på vej henad? Giver jer de første eksempler på, hvad vi har taget fat på, når vi snakker om resiliens og den her strategi. Giver jer et eksempel på, hvad der sker inden for erhvervslivet i forhold til, hvordan det her med byernes udfordring kan blive en del af morgendagens innovation og forretningsudvikling. Og giver et konkret eksempel på også, hvordan vi arbejder med det aktive medborgerskab som en del af hele fundamentet også for et godt og velfungerende samfund. Så jeg vil gerne have lov til at starte med at byde velkommen til Sloth, direktør for Teknik og Miljø.
Kan I, ja, der er hul igennem. Hej. Ja, altså, når man hører Vikram og Mr. Barber tale om byer, så er det nogle kæmpe byer, så kan man godt sige, så er Vejle jo ikke ret stor. Men man må sige, når man ser på, hvad Vejle gør, og Vejle kan, og hvad Vejle vil, så er Vejle faktisk stor. Det er jo glædeligt at høre Vikram sige, Vejle is a small place doing big things. Det passer perfekt til selvbilledet, kan jeg sige. Og det passer sådan set også rigtig godt til titlen Hop Vejle med vilje, som jo har den der dobbelt tydige lyd, ikke? Med vilje, der er altså vilje i Vejle, og jeg har givet den undertitlen Vejles kendetegn, det er fordi, det her det er et hurtigt oplæg, hvor jeg skal på rekordtid give et billede af, hvad Vejle egentlig er, hvad er sjælen i Vejle. Så det bliver sådan en fortælling, det bliver forskellige brikker, som jeg lægger ud, så håber jeg, at jer, der kender Vejle, I kan kende det, og jer, der ikke kender Vejle, I tænker, det er jo lige godt pokkers, er det Vejle? Det der, det er nogle hårde facts som Vejle. Det er sådan en stor by i Danmark, 6. største by. Hvad mange ikke ved, det er, at det faktisk er en meget stor konferenceby, hotelby, rigtig mange overnatninger. Og der er flere steder som det her i Vejle, som brander byen. Så står der et ord, der står midtbystrategi. Det kommer jeg lidt tilbage til, men prøv at mærke, at det ord midtbystrategi, det er ret vigtigt for Vejle. Der var nogen, der nævnte, at andre byer havde lagt center udenfor. Det kommer jeg lige lidt tilbage til. Det har betydet rigtig meget for Vejles liv, at der er en strategi for midtbyen. Det der billede, det kender alle vi danskere jo ganske godt. Der er 2 metropoler, der er 2 centrale byområder i Danmark. Der er dem over østpå, København, Øresundsregion, som de stærke store byområder. Så er der det østjyske bybånd for Randers cirka, og så ned til Kolding og så videre herovre omkring. Det østjyske bybånd, det er Vejle jo en del af. Selvbilledet er, at Vejle også er en stor del af det, og at Vejle er en vigtig og central del af det her østjyske bybånd, og det vil man gerne noget mere af. Og i det her bybånd ligger selvfølgelig trekantområdet, som er et centralt samarbejdsorgan for Vejle. Og det er jo interessant, når vi hører Mr. Barber tale i dag om samarbejde. Jeg synes, at vi kunne tænke over, hvad kan vi få ud af trekantområdet endnu mere, end vi får? Hvis vi pooler vores power i trekantområdet, hvad vil det give? Man griner ikke. Okay, mere power. Den her op til venstre, den viser antallet af arbejdspladser, man kan nå inden for en times kørsel. Der kan man nå ca. 600.000 arbejdspladser. Det er faldet lidt de senere år, men det er trods alt et ret højt tal, og er jo med til at trække både mennesker og endnu flere arbejdspladser til. Den anden slide, den viser jo den centrale infrastruktur, som er utrolig vigtig for Vejle. Vejle ligger godt. Det er et gammelt vadested, hvor man kom og skulle over vandet, og det er stadigvæk et knudepunkt. Det er jo ikke det, der har gjort Vejle alene, men det er stadigvæk centralt for Vejle med de mange forbindelser. Jeg kunne lige nævne Billund Lufthavn med snart 3 millioner passagerer. Og en Billundbane, der er på vej, så man nu kan køre direkte til Billund fra Odense til Vejle og til Billund. Det bliver enormt betydende for de vækstmuligheder, Vejle får. Så Vejle fortsætter med at ville mere endnu og har mere vilje. Og folk, de kommer til Vejle. Vejle er en af de der byer i Danmark, der har stor befolkningstilvækst. Cirka 1000 tilflyttere netto hvert år. Meget børnefamilier. Lidt for få unge, men dog også en del af dem. Og også nogle af dem der. Dem er der så også nogle af i byen. Der er nemlig rigtig mange gode, stærke, velhavende familier i Vejle, og det skal I heller ikke grine af. Det er utrolig vigtigt for en by som Vejle, at der er nogen, der investerer i deres by. Hvis vi kigger ned på havnen, så en stor del af investeringen er genereret af lokale penge. Det er man meget bevidst om på kommunal plan. at sammen, der kan man noget helt specielt, når man har ressourcerne. Det fylder meget i vores arbejde, at arbejde med bosætning. Så hvis vi lige kigger på, hvorfor de kommer, jamen så er Vejle jo et fantastisk sted. Hvis vi lige, jeg nævnte lige havnen, men havnen med ny byggeri, nyt liv, er jo helt unik. Og ikke mindst det, der foregår omkring vores midtby, handelsby. Det er Danmarks bedste handelsby lige nu, blevet udnævnt i 14, tror jeg, 14 og 15. Og hvis der er noget politikere i Vejle Byråd er enige om, så er det, at vi har det, der hedder en midtbystrategi. Det vil sige, at vi er enige om, at vi lægger alt, hvad vi kan lægge i midtbyen af liv, handel, oplevelser. Fordi så er vi sikre på, at folk ikke kan komme frem. Og når folk ikke kan komme frem, så er de super glade. Det værste, der kan ske, det er, at der er for mange ledige parkeringspladser. Det er selvfølgelig lidt sjovt sagt, men også kun lidt, for det er faktisk enormt vigtigt, at der er liv i byen. Der er utrolig mange besøgende på gågaden, og faktisk så er Vejle en af de byer i Danmark, en af de få byer i Danmark, der har haft vækst i handelen her under finanskrisen. Det har været meget centralt for Vejles selvbillede og Vejles vækst. Så har jeg taget en med, der hedder fokus på læring og velfærd. Jamen det handler om, at de unge er jo fremtiden. Det kan godt være, det er byerne, der skal skabe det, men de unge er jo fremtiden. Der er gennem årene, de sidste 10 år, opstået rigtig mange uddannelser, mellemlange uddannelser i Vejle. Der er ca. 7-8.000 studerende hver eneste dag, der bliver uddannet i Vejle. Og det er nogle af de billeder, der er heroppe, og det handler jo om alt fra sygeplejersker til andre faglige uddannelser. Så de unge, hvem vi gerne have flere af, det er okay, de forlader os, men de skulle gerne komme tilbage, og det gør de også rigtig ofte. Og hvordan er det så, det her det sker? Jamen det er, fordi samarbejde, det er altså en utrolig vigtig hjørnesten. Innovation via de kreative erhverv. Vi har fået iværksætterprisen sidste år. Offentlig-privat samarbejde er en utrolig vigtig del i at skabe den vækst og den velstand, der er i Vejle. Hvad end det hedder Green Tech, eller det hedder spinderihallerne, eller noget helt tredje. Klimaudfordringerne har vi taget med her. Og det er fordi, at klimaudfordringen er jo en af de indsatsområder, der er i Resiliens arbejdet. Danmark er en af de 10 byer, som har specielle udfordringer og har lavet risikostyringsplaner, fordi det siger staten, man skal, for at sikre værdierne i midtbyen. Så det siger jo alt om, at det er enormt vigtigt at arbejde med at være resilient på klimaområdet, og vi arbejder konkret med planer for, hvordan kan vi lave en dæmning? Hvordan kan vi lave en dæmning med oplevelser på? Skal den gå ind i byen? Skal den gå ud i vandet? Det er en af de helt store ting, som vil fylde i Resiliens arbejde. Jonas vil komme ind på, hvad vi ellers arbejder med. Og det er ikke en fejl. En anden væsentlig årsag til, at Vejle klarer sig godt, det er, at der er en god balance mellem den hårde styring og den frie fantasi. Der er nogen, der siger, at det der er økonomidirektøren, og den anden, det er kommunaldirektøren. Og det tror jeg faktisk er rigtigt. Vejle er for andet år i træk blevet udnævnt til Danmarks mest veldrevne kommune. Og de burde måske også være udnævnt til Danmarks mest innovative kommune. Fordi de to ting her er nemlig rigtig meget sammen. Den stramme strategiske økonomistyring har faktisk skabt råderum til, at man har skabt rigtig meget innovation. At man tør at gå ud på vippen og prøve noget nyt. For eksempel sådan noget som det her. Der er også et meget stort initiativ på medarbejderside. Vi kalder det hverdagsinnovation. Det er faktisk lovligt at lave fejl i Vejle Kommune. Det er okay, man skal bare ikke gøre det 2 gange. Og den der risikovillighed og den der viden, eller den der erkendelse af, at det jo kunne godt være, at det var medarbejderne, der faktisk sidder med den bedste viden, eller dem ude i den private sektor, der faktisk kan give det spark, der skal til, det er man meget bevidst om, og man tør godt at gøre det. Så hvis alle kommuner var lige så veldrevne som Vejle Kommune, så kunne man spare 25,5 milliarder kroner i skatter. Det er vi da stolte af. Okay. Vejle med vilje. Det her, det er de 4 indsatsområder i den vision, som politikerne lavede, da det nye byråd trådte sammen for godt et år siden. Førende erhvervs- og vækstkommune, mest attraktive kommune, bor og leve i, de bedste læringsmiljøer og national førerposition inden for velfærdsudvikling. Og det skal jo ske ved, at vi har noget vilje, og vi tør, ved at vi tør at samskabe, ved at vi tør at slippe innovationen fri, som jeg lige sagde, og så ved at vi arbejder bæredygtigt med vækst. Det er sådan set kernen i det. Når jeg lige tager det med nu, så er det fordi, at vi har et ønske om, at vi også udlever det her. Det gør vi blandt andet ved, at vi har lavet en planstrategi. Kommunerne skal lave en planstrategi. Den har vi bygget op på det her, for at det vi kunne kalde at gennemføre den her vision. Fordi rent planmæssigt, man kan sige, det er enormt vigtigt, at vi har de rette planer og de rette planprocesser. Så vi arbejder seriøst med at lave planer og plankultur, som er det, vi kalder innovativ. Det vil sige, I kan selv læse det, men det står deroppe, men grundlæggende så synes vi, at vi skal være rigtig, rigtig gode til at arbejde udefra ind, altså gå ud og spørge ud i samfundet, hvad der er brug for, og så gå hjem og lave det. Vi synes, det er enormt vigtigt, at vi er optaget af processer og prospekter i stedet for planer og planlægning. Vi synes, det er enormt vigtigt, at vi bruger loven som en, der giver muligheder, og ikke en, der begrænser. Altså, at vi tager politikernes ønsker med ind og siger, hvordan kan vi arbejde med det her? Så den der innovative plankultur, den vil vi rigtig, rigtig gerne arbejde mere med. Det er en af de ting, der også er Vejles sjæl. Og det er så det sidste billede. Det var fra før vi fik 5 bølger. Nå ja, vi har vist også kun 2 i dag. Og det var før, at vi fik lavet havnearealet færdigt. Jeg håber, det gav et billede af Vejles sjæl. Tak for ordet.
Tak skal du have. Utrolig smukt billede her. Så vi laver for meget feedback. Tak skal du have, Michael, for at sætte scenen her. Jeg vil her det næste lille kvarters tid fortælle lidt om, kan man sige, hvordan vi startede ud med det her samarbejde i de internationale netværk for de her 100 resiliente byer. Og som I jo godt kan fornemme, så er det her begreb omkring resiliens, det er jo noget, der spirer. Det er jo noget, der betyder rigtig mange forskellige ting. Det er både noget, der ligesom knytter sig til fysikken, til det sociale område. Det er et begreb, kan man sige, som vi er ved at finde ud af, hvad er styrken i det? Hvad kan vi anvende det til? Hvad er det, andre gør? Hvordan tænker vi det ind, kan man sige, den udvikling, der foregår i Vejle i øjeblikket? Og det er selvfølgelig en rigtig vigtig pointe i den her sammenhæng, det er, at vi er med til selv at skabe det her. Vi er i en proces lige nu, hvor det er os herinde i lokalet og alle andre, som har lyst til at deltage i det, som er med ombord, kan man sige, i at finde ud af, hvad er en resilient by, og ikke mindst, hvordan ser morgendagens resiliente by ud. Og det er jo det spørgsmål, hvad skal man sige, vi har taget udgangspunkt i. Fordi der er ingen tvivl om, at i Vejle, der er vi jo resiliente på en lang række forskellige områder. Vi kan jo høre, hvad skal man sige, det går jo fantastisk godt med rigtig mange af de initiativer, vi arbejder med på nuværende tidspunkt. Og det vi går og leder efter lige nu, det er, hvor er det næste trin? Hvor er de spirende udfordringer, som vi skal begynde at gøre os klar til? Og hvordan kan Resiliens-strategien bidrage til at komme godt ind i fremtiden? Det er jo noget af det, vi har sat os for som en del af det her samarbejde. Lige også sådan for historiens skyld, så må jeg sige, at vi var jo ikke i gang med det her, hvis ikke det havde været for, nu kan jeg ikke lige se, hvor du sidder henne, Elisabeth, men som spottede den her mulighed for at komme med ombord i sin tid, og der var du. Og det er jo hele basis for, og det hele taget at komme med i det her. Så det er også at have, hvad skal man sige, de medarbejdere, som har blik for, at det her det foregår rundt omkring i verden, det er utrolig vigtigt og utrolig centralt. Sidenhen kan man sige, så har vi selvfølgelig fået bygget en masse opmærksomhed op omkring det her, og vi havde også besøg sidste år af, præsidenten for 100 Cities, Michael Berkovich, som overrakte medlemskabet af det her netværk til vores borgmester. Og hele det her, hvad skal man sige, har været med til at sætte fod i den her proces. Hvis man skal prøve at vende lidt om og sige, hvordan prøver vi at forstå resiliens i sådan en Vejle-kontekst, så handler det her om at prøve at sætte os ind i de andre byers situation. Prøve at tage ved lære af, hvad der foregår. Lyt til de gode råd, vi får i netværket. Kig ud og tage ved lære af, hvad andre laver på nuværende tidspunkt. Men en rigtig, rigtig vigtig pointe omkring det er også, at der er mange, der kigger den her vej. Rigtig mange af de udfordringer, som man arbejder med globalt set, er jo noget af det, man synes, de skandinaviske lande rent faktisk mestrer rigtig meget på nuværende tidspunkt. Vi har jo et velfærdssamfund, som rigtig mange misunder os. Vi er jo faktisk rigtig langt i forhold til bæredygtig omstilling osv. Så vi gør rigtig mange ting i forvejen, som rigtig mange rigtig gerne vil lære af. Og den mulighed er ikke kun noget, hvad skal man sige, vi skal gøre, hvis vi har lyst. Nej, det forpligter. Det forpligter at være, hvad skal man sige, så ressourcestærkt et samfund i den globale verden, som vi har fået beskrevet her tidligere. Så der er ingen tvivl om, at vi skal ud og tage ved lære, men vi skal i allerhøjeste grad også bidrage. Så hvis man skulle sige, hvordan kunne vi forstå det her resilience-koncept i en Vejle-kontekst, så handler det selvfølgelig om de helt basale ting omkring, hvordan vi beskytter vores samfund, skaber samfundssikring, sørge for, hvad kan man sige, at de udfordringer, de naturkatastrofer, de ulykker, der potentielt kan ske, at vi dæmmer op for dem. Vi har risikostyringsplanen. Vi arbejder, kan man sige, på at lave klimatilpasning. Der foregår også selvfølgelig en masse omkring tilpasning af beredskabsområdet osv., til at begynde også at være klar til nye typer af udfordringer. Vi har en kultur, hvor vi kærer om hinanden, vi tager os af hinanden, kan man sige, i krisesituationer, og det kan vi være rigtig, rigtig stolte af. Så handler resiliens i allerhøjeste grad også om forbindelser. Forbindelser mellem mennesker, forbindelser på tværs af sektorer, mellem offentlig og privat, på tværs af generationer, på tværs af kulturer, på tværs af byer, på tværs af lande, som vi har hørt om i dag. Og der har vi jo en rigtig mange eksempler på det, der demonstrerer, at det er vi faktisk også allerede rigtig gode til. Design og relationer, Aspit, Byhaveforeningen osv. Vi samarbejder med universiteterne, og vi er også begyndt at kigge på, hvordan er det de nye generationer forstår sociale forbindelser. Det den digitale verden, kan man sige, gør ved os, og de muligheder, der ligger i det. Så i forbindelserne ligger den sociale sammenhængskraft, de netværk, kan man sige, der skal styrkes, og det er også noget af det, vi skal arbejde videre på og blive ved med at understøtte. Og så ligger der dynamikken i det, i forhold til, hvordan det her det som bliver basis for en by, der udvikler sig, som vokser, som tilpasser sig de nye typer af udfordringer, vi har beskrevet her. Hvordan vi skaber robuste børn, som er parat til at møde den fremtid, de skal vokse op i. Hvordan vi skaber samarbejde og bånd imellem nye typer af kultur. Hvordan det her det bliver basis for at stimulere kreativitet, erhvervsudvikling osv. Og ikke mindst kan man sige, hvordan det er noget, der bliver ved med at holde kurven i den rigtige retning. Så resiliens, kan man sige, er noget, der både handler om beskyttelse, om samfundssikring. Det er også et dynamisk greb, kan man sige, som kan være drivkraft for innovation. Og det er en rigtig, rigtig vigtig pointe omkring det. Og det er det især, fordi der er ingen tvivl om, at de spirende udfordringer, vi er blevet præsenteret for i dag, jamen de kommer et eller andet sted jo kun til at møde os i sandsynligvis en højere grad, end det vi har set indtil nu. Klimaforandringerne, de vil sætte deres spor, og vi er også nødt til måske at tænke i nogle nye typer af partnerskaber, for at kunne imødekomme dem på nogle nye måder. Der er heller ingen tvivl om, at vores velfærdssamfund er også noget, vi diskuterer i meget i øjeblikket. Hvad skal man sige, det er velfærdssamfund også parat til de nye typer af udfordringer, sociale strukturer, som vi ser. Vi oplever, at flere og flere mennesker står uden for samfundet, har svært ved at tage del i det. Og der kan være forskellige reaktioner på det. Der kan enten være den, hvor man hvad skal man sige, træder ud af det, eller man agerer aggressivt. Så der er ingen tvivl om, at et samfund, som er inkluderende, og som formår på sin vis at tænke bredt i sin inklusion, er fundamentet for et resilient samfund. Så handler det også om de store omstillinger. Resiliens handler også i allerhøjeste grad om, det kender vi jo fra vores eget liv, når vi er igennem nogle faser, hvor vi skal forandre os. Det kan være fra barn til voksen. Det kan være, hvad skal man sige, et nyt arbejde. Det kan være, at du flytter til en anden by. På de tidspunkter er vi som mennesker meget sårbare. Hvad kan man sige, vi er i en forandringsproces, som kan stresse os, og vi har behov for, kan man sige, at arbejde med at kunne mestre sådan nogle transformationer. Det gælder både på det individuelle plan, men det gælder i højeste grad også, når vi snakker om byer og samfund. Så det er også at få taget hånd om, kan man sige, de omstillingsprocesser, vi er i gang med nu her, som især handler om den bæredygtige omstilling, er også utrolig central for resiliens. En anden en, man også kunne nævne, er den digitale omstilling. Vi går fra et analogt til et digitalt samfund i øjeblikket. Det rummer en hel masse muligheder, men det rummer også en masse udfordringer. Hvem er med ombord? Hvad er det for nogle nye typer, hvad skal man sige, af konstellationer, socialt, forretningsmæssigt, der opstår ud af det her? Får vi taget hånd om den omstilling osv.? Det er også en meget, meget central del af det hele. Og de her ting har vi omsat i nogle indsatsområder, som vi arbejder med som fundament for vores strategiarbejde. Og det handler selvfølgelig om klima og oversvømmelse. En resiliens tilgang til det. Det handler om samskabelse og aktiv medborgerskab, og det er blandt andet også noget af det, som Mikkel vil fortælle om lidt senere. Så handler det om økonomisk resiliens. Det handler både om vores soliditet, kan man sige, men det handler også, kan man sige, om at se de nye typer af finansielle strukturer, der kommer til at præge byernes fremtid. Så handler det om integration og det boligstrategiske arbejde, og det handler om digitalisering, og især den del, der har at gøre med inklusion. Og bagved det her, hvad skal man sige, er der en stor projektorganisation. Det er alle de søde mennesker, der går rundt med skiltene her i dag, som er med til at løfte den her opgave. Så er der selvfølgelig nogen, der allerede nu sidder og tænker, hvad får Vejle ud af det? Hvad skal vi i det her? Og jeg vil nok sige, det er nok på tide, at vi begynder at vente en lille smule om og sige, hvad er det egentlig, Vejle kan bidrage med? Fordi det er derigennem, at udbyttet af det her, det begynder at komme, især set i forhold til det internationale samarbejde. Vi har mange års tradition for innovativ byudvikling. Det har Michael været inde på. Vi har en robust by, vi har en stærk offentlig sektor, vi har rigtig meget, hvad skal man sige, at stå på. Vi har engagerede borgere og virksomheder. Vi har lysten til at samarbejde og finde nye løsninger. Der er faktisk rigtig meget, kan man sige, vi kan blive ved med at basere det her på og tænke nye veje for. Og det er jo utrolig interessant det øjeblik, at vi begynder at tage de her ting ud i, hvad skal man sige, den globale diskussion og prøve at se, men er der nye ting, vi kan tage ved lære af. Nu hørte vi om Porto Alegre, omkring det, man kalder den deltagende budgetplanlægning, hvor man jo faktisk distribuerer en del af tingene ud i lokalområder i forhold til, hvordan man fordeler sine ressourcer. Så nogle af de ting er jo rigtig spændende at prøve at se, om vi kan tage ved lære i den her sammenhæng. Så hvad er det så, vi skal med resiliens? Jamen for det første, så skal vi i gang med at begynde at få linsen på plads, begynde at forstå, kan man sige, hvad det er, det her det handler om. Man kan måske langt hen ad vejen sige, at noget af det, vi har hørt i dag, det er, at det samfund, vi måske kendte før, som vi har opbygget over de sidste 100 år, hvis man kalder det et produkt på sin vis, så synger det måske på sidste vers. Vi er jo faktisk på vej ind i en periode nu her, hvor vi skal til at mobilisere innovation. Ikke, hvad skal man sige, kun som noget af det, der foregår inde i laboratorier med teknologi, men offentlig innovation, samfundsinnovation. På de tidspunkter, hvor de her nye typer af måder at se og anskue problemer på, skal løfte os. Så man kan kalde resiliens et slags mindset for det 21. århundrede. Det er det at finde det næste trin, det globale udsyn, den her etik og den her helhedstænkning, der skal til. Det er at mestre evnen til at håndtere ubalancer, altså overgangene, den usikkerhed, der også er. Fordi hvem ved, hvad det er for en type samfund, vi er om x antal år. De her nye globale afhængigheder, som er blevet nævnt tidligere. Og så er der den dynamiske del af det, at bruge innovation, bruge bæredygtighed til at finde løsninger på. Og så er det den effektive ledelse af de her samfundstransformationer, som beskrevet tidligere. Fordi en del af det her, det handler ikke kun om at mestre dem, det handler faktisk også om at gøre det rigtig hurtigt. Fordi byerne er også i en situation, hvor de konkurrerer med hinanden, og hvor vi skal blive ved med at kunne mestre det og omstille os til et attraktivt bysamfund. Så det ligger meget centralt i det også. Så hvad får vi så ud af det? Jamen, der er det globale samarbejde. Der er også den platform, vi vil begynde at bygge op. Der er rigtig mange forskellige forgreninger af det på nuværende tidspunkt. Offentligt-privat samarbejde, og også på sigt også mere omkring involvering af civilsamfundet. Der er adgang til viden, der er adgang til funding og netværk, og så giver det også en spændende hverdag. Der er ingen tvivl om, at resiliens, kan man sige, tilbyder også noget, som kan vække en nysgerrighed, kan vække et engagement. Og jeg vil bare sige, alle dem, der har lyst til at være med, I er velkommen ombord. Så lige sådan lidt kort omkring, hvad der sker helt konkret. Vi er i gang med at lave den her strategi, og det er noget, vi gør, kan man sige, i samarbejde med Rockefeller. Jeg tror måske, de fleste er vant til den her sådan lidt viking-tilgang, hvor vi siger, alle mand derover, og så løber vi, og så har vi en strategi efter 3 måneder. Men for rent faktisk at bygge læring ind i processen, hvor vi samarbejder med de andre byer, mens vi udvikler det her, så bygger vi det lige så stille op, kan man sige, i samarbejde med Rockefeller, med Eclay og med de andre byer. Og vi prøver at sætte fokus på morgendagens resiliente bysamfund. Hvad er det for noget? Hvad vil det sige at bo i det? Hvordan ser det ud? Hvad består det af? Hvad er det for nogle processer, der udspiller sig deri? Kig på nogle styrker og nogle udviklingsmuligheder. Prøv at identificere nogle af de scenarier, som kommer til at præge os fremadrettet. Sæt fokus på indsatser, konkrete projekter. Også have nogle konkrete områder i Vejle by, hvor vi vil arbejde med det. Hvad kan man sige? Resilienskvarterer, hvor vi rent faktisk får skabt også en autenticitet omkring, hvad det her det handler om. Det er rigtig vigtigt for os. Og så begynder moden de her platforme og partnerskaber, som Resiliens Lab, som vi skal høre om lige om lidt. Så langt, så godt. Og jeg håber på, kan man sige, at vi får taget del i det her sammen. Og jeg glæder mig rigtig meget til også at se jer undervejs til den her proces og høre lidt om, kan man sige, hvad er det for nogle åbninger, vi kan se, og hvordan kan vi begynde at samarbejde om morgendagens resiliente by. Tak. Så følger der, så har vi 2 konkrete eksempler på en del af det, der allerede udspiller sig på nuværende tidspunkt omkring Resiliens. Det er velkommen til Jørgen.
Tak for det.
Ja.
Jeg ved ikke, om jeg er kommet på her. Jo, det er. Har du sådan en... Ja. Jamen, velkommen til alle, og tak fordi jeg må komme her i dag. Jeg hedder Jørgen Andersen, og jeg er direktør for GreenTech Center. Det, jeg vil tale lidt om det næste kvarter, det er, hvordan kan vi engagere det private erhvervsliv i at være med til at løse sådan nogle samfundsmæssige opgaver, som vi sidder og snakker om nu her i dag. Og hvordan kan vi gøre det i et samarbejde, hvor også forskning og uddannelse og myndighederne spiller sammen, sådan vi får også kreeret nogle jobs og noget vækst, udover at vi får en bedre by at bo i, men også får den tid med. Så det er det, mit indlæg kommer til at dreje sig lidt om. Og den har en todeling, fordi vi har etableret et GreenTech Center her for 9 måneder siden, og det er den, vi godt vil bygge lidt videre på, og synes, det kan være spændende. Så, and last but not least, the presentation, what you'll see is in English, but I'll speak in Danish, so I hope it's okay. So, der er ikke nogen, der får det, de vil have. Sådan er den globale verden. Kind of resilient. Jeg vil komme ind og snakke lidt omkring GreenTech Centeret først, og så hvordan at, vi går og tænker på den her integration af det private erhvervsliv, også til resiliensmæssige opgaver. Ganske kort, GreenTech Centeret blev åbnet den 24. juni, og centeret arbejder på netop at omsætte de vedvarende energiproblemsudfordringer, vi har i Danmark og Europa, i form af, at der kommer mere vedvarende energi ind i vores kære net, hvordan vi får det omformet. Så det er helt den store arbejde omkring grøn teknologi, som er fokusområdet for GreenTech Center. Den måde, som vi startede op på, var fra starten et Triple Helix Corporation, sådan at forstå, at myndigheder, uddannelsesinstitutioner og virksomheder arbejdede sammen på de løsninger, som vi arbejder på. Selve centeret stiller en række faciliteter til rådighed omkring demonstration og levende laboratorier og måder, man kan sælge produkter på for at hjælpe de grønne teknologivirksomheder. Men på den anden side, så stiller den en masse teknologier og løsninger og projekter og energidata til rådighed for universiteter og for myndigheder. Området, der bliver arbejdet på, er rigtig meget omkring energi, med energilagring, energiproduktion og energiforbrug. Det, som vi har i GreenTech Centeret, er en række fysiske ting. Et hus, som fungerer med en åben energiplatform, som man kan bruge den til at forske i. Et værksted, hvor der kan laves prototyper og workshops for både uddannelsesinstitutioner, forskning og virksomheder. Og en stor energipark, som fungerer som sådan en mini-udgave af den model, som måske Danmark skal ind i på den lange bane, sådan et mikrogrid, hvor vi kan lege med nye teknologier og få dem op at stå. Sidst men ikke mindst, så er der tilknyttet en række levende laboratorier, hvor man kan teste sine produkter ud og se, hvordan de virker i samfundet, henholdsvis i centret, men også i et område, hvor vi allerede har 25 erhvervsvirksomheder med nu, så man kan se, hvordan virker de her løsninger egentlig ude i den rigtige verden. Og målsætningen er her også at gå ind og kigge på, jamen kunne en by som Vejle, som jo også vil være resilient, og så sige, jamen hvordan søren får vi også hele byen til at være måske et levende laboratorie til at lege med nogle af de her løsninger, som vi skal finde de næste par år. I GreenTech Center er der en hel startup service. Det er vigtigt, at vi også kan hjælpe de små idéer videre, de små virksomheder til at vokse. Der er rigtig meget netværk på tværs af rigtig mange organisationer, og der er rigtig mange Triple Helix aktiviteter og projekter og innovation, som foregår både med henholdsvis kommune, uddannelsesinstitutioner, forskning eller virksomheder som udgangspunkt. Og sidst men ikke mindst, så Money Makes the World Go Round, er det også, at der er muligheden for, at vi prøver at stille nogle af de gode idéer, som jo også skal finansieres på et tidspunkt, og stille det lidt tættere på, at der også kan være venturekapital, som man kan få til nogle af de løsninger, som måtte blive udviklet. Fra starten af tænkte vi meget omkring GreenTech Center som værende internationalt, og derfor har nogle platforme begyndende rundt omkring i verden, netop for at share best practice, og for at tilbyde udenlandske virksomheder at komme til Vejle, og danske virksomheder at komme til udlandet, hvis det kan hjælpe dem i udbredelsen af den grønne teknologi. Og det var her, hvor da vi hørte omkring resiliency-delen kom ind, som roundup på GreenTech Center, kan vi sige, jamen Der er 30 virksomheder med 200 ansatte i dag, som arbejder der. Men der er 220 virksomheder, eller 180 virksomheder og 21 universiteter og public institutions, som er involveret i projekter ved os som medlemmer. Og sidste år holdt vi omkring 40 events med over 1000 forskellige deltagere. Så det, der er humlen ved den, er egentlig, vi siger, jamen det har vist sig, at ved den her Triple Helix-ånd, synes vi egentlig, vi har engageret rigtig mange virksomheder i jobs omkring energidel af det. Partnerne er rigtig mange, som I kan se. Det er privat ejet, det er private fundings, 3 lokale familier og en fond, men det er universiteter, uddannelsessteder, myndigheder, elselskaber og netværk og virksomheder, som gør det. Og i sådan et center som afslutning kan man sige, at det er store og små virksomheder, som er i sådan et center og er involveret i det. Alt fra stort til batterier, til solenergi, til energy harvesting, til vindmøller, til komfortklima, til solceller osv. Det er den baggrund, som jeg står her med GreenTech Centeret i dag. Og hvis vi kigger sådan lidt ud på planer for også at få engageret en dynamik på Resiliens blandt private virksomheder, jamen så går vi med planer og siger, at vi synes, at der kunne være et mål om at få skabt 1000 jobs, som arbejder med resiliens, hvis vi kigger over de næste 4-5 år. Og den måde, som vi tænker lidt at stille til rådighed og gribe an på, er, at vi har valgt, at vi godt vil gå ind og lave et hus i Vejle, som skal prøve at vise og demonstrere nogle af de resiliens-idéer, som forhåbentlig kommer op her de næste mange år. Så vi har et fast sted, hvor vi også kan prøve at vise tingene, mødes og drøfte det, så der også er en fast basis for det. Men det andet, der er væsentligt for at få opfyldt det her, det er at få lavet et samarbejde, et innovationssamarbejde, et netværk som en forening, hvor at alle, ikke bare vejlensere, men i hele Danmark, og meget gerne åbne op med det netværk, som Jonas har til hele verden, hvor vi deler erfaring omkring resiliens, og vi har valgt at fokusere rigtig meget på energi, data og vand som værende fokusområderne, fordi det er forsyningsdelen af det, som Resiliens Lab Danmark gør. Og det tredje er at få en masse Triple Helix projekter inden for energi og data og vand sat i stilling, så vi kan begynde at få noget praktisk ud af det. Fordi det er jo helt fantastisk, det vi hører i dag, hvor vi har ligesom paraplyen. Det, der jo nu bliver opgaven over de næste 5 år, når vi har en fælles forståelse, det er at få nogle aktiviteter i gang, så vi egentlig bevæger nogle ændringer i byen, bevæger nogle ændringer for samfundet og bevæger forhåbentlig også nogle jobs og vækst. Og det har gjort, at vi har været initiativtager sammen med en række gode kræfter til at lave Resiliens Lab Danmark, som er et innovationssamarbejde omkring forsyningsresilient i fremtidens byer. Så vi fokuserer sådan rigtig meget i vores del på energi og data og vand, men det er jo rigtig meget med forbrugeren i centrum. Og pionererne bagved det er meget bredt startet op, både med Vejle Kommune og med via University College, med Syddansk Universitet, med Vejle Spildevand, med en CEO og med GreenTech Centeret i det. Men det er også der er pionererne, og vi skal ud nu og vil åbne op for alle, som ønsker at være med i det her samarbejde med at prøve at arbejde på en bedre forsyningsresiliens til store byer. Når vi kigger lidt på det omkring selve projektet Resiliens Lab Danmark, jamen så tænker vi, at vi er simpelthen begunstiget her i Danmark, og også i Vejle af, at vi har jo egentlig ikke de store problemer. Det er jo ikke sådan, at vi ikke har strøm om eftermiddagen. Det er ikke sådan, at vi har oversvømmelse, som vælter ind i de store mængder, så vi ikke kan arbejde. Så det vi tænker på, det er, at vi bliver nødt til at gå ind og kigge lidt på, jamen hvordan ser en by ud som Vejle, hvis vi nu prøver at tænke os 35 år frem. Om 35 år, så vil Danmark være forsynet kun af vedvarende energi. Det skal komme fra vindmøller og soldel af det. Det vil sige, at vi vil have perioder, hvor det ikke blæser, hvor der ikke er energi. Hvad gør vi der? Vi vil have en befolkningstilvækst i Vejle. Jeg tror, den stiger med 1000 om året. Det vil sige, at vi vil have 35.000 mennesker mere om 35 år. Hvad betyder det? Vi vil have klimaændringerne, som vil lave nogle ændringer, som betyder noget for byens centrum. Så vi ønsker at lave den her lidt brændende platform, hvor man kunne sige, nu leger vi simpelthen lidt, hvordan kunne Vejle se ud om 35 år? og deriblandt måske være med til at få endnu mere fokus på resiliente løsninger, så vi kan løse dem, inden det giver et problem, og ikke bare bagefter, som er værende og lappe på dem. Og 2 af de områder, som vi fokuserer meget på, er omkring decentrale og standalone løsninger, sådan at en by også er resilient, hvis der kommer et energinedbrud, et uheld på det. Og det andet er, at vi tror, vi bliver nødt til at tænke på, at en by bliver nødt til at være selvforsynende generelt på den lange bane. Vi kan ikke blive ved med at leve af, at vi importerer ting. Vi skal også kunne producere lige så meget energi, som vi egentlig forbruger. Vi skal være resiliente, vi skal være bæredygtige, vi skal være modstandsdygtige. Og det betyder, at projektet går ind og vil arbejde på og simulere lidt, hvordan kan Vejle se ud på nogle specielle områder, når vi kigger frem i tiden. Hvad kunne der ske, hvis det ser sådan ud? Hvad for nogle potentielle hændelser kunne der ske? Hvordan kunne vi så forebygge dem? Og sidst, men ikke mindst, også gå ind i nogle områder i Vejle og prøve at teste af, og så sige, så lad os lege med det og se, om det virker i virkeligheden, og vi får det her til at fungere på den helt rigtige måde. Vi er lige startet op, så derfor er den her konference rigtig spændende for os. Vi får overhatten på, vi skal se, hvor vi passer ind. Vi har haft de første par møder lidt i det, hvor vi snakker om, jamen det kunne være mange områder, vi skulle arbejde med. Det kunne være en fælles forståelse for, hvordan er supply resilience, altså forsyningsresiliensen til byen. Hvordan fungerer det? Hvad er vores opfattelse af det? Det kan være noget med energisymbioser, og sige, hvordan får vi udnyttet det, at vi har nogle fabrikker, der har for meget energi, og nogen har for lidt. Kan vi få det til at hænge sammen? Det kan være helt nye bydele, som skal grundlægges og sige, kunne vi prøve at kigge den i en fremtidsperspektiv? Det kunne være at få vores affald brugt til energi, noget vi alle snakker om, men lad os nu prøve at gøre det, og lad os se, det kunne også være i forbindelse med byens busser eller andre ting. Det kunne være at kigge på det, der er under jorden. Vi tænker meget på det, der er over jorden, men ikke så meget, hvad der foregår under jorden af forskellige læringsmuligheder osv. Det kan være hele smart city-begrebet. Det kan være ord, der løber ind og belaster os. Hvordan kan vi løse det på en bedre måde? Det kan være vand i en del af byen. Det kan være vand, hvordan man får det absorberet i nogle områder. Det kan være nogle helt nye projekter, som er blevet renoveret og fokuserer på vand, som Østerbro gør. Og. Det er blot for at give et billede af, at det er nogle af de ting, som vi sidder og diskuterer nu, som kunne være relevante at gå ind og kigge på. Min afsluttende sæt er, at vi tror, det er rigtig vigtigt for at få engageret private virksomheder virkelig i det her arbejde, så skabe et rum, meget gerne et triple helix rum, hvor vi i fællesskab har nogle projekter, vi går ind i, og vi er meget interesseret i. Det hedder Resiliens Lab Danmark, og det er bevidst i det. Vi skal have alle de gode løsninger, vi har i Danmark op i det, og vi er meget åbne for at få endnu flere medlemmer og deltagere, der vil være med i den her rejse sammen med os, både fra universitetsverden, fra uddannelsesverden, men også fra private virksomheder og myndigheder. Så det er sådan vores vinkel på det. Tak for jeres tid.
Tusind tak, Jørgen. Fantastisk. Hvad hedder det? Jeg runger altid. Jamen, jeg håber, det var et første eksempel på, kan man sige, hvordan resiliens spiller sammen med udfordringer og bliver en del af, hvad skal man sige, en ny dynamik for byens udvikling på mange forskellige måder. Jeg vil godt have lov til at byde velkommen til Mikkel Dragmose-Hansen, som er det næste gode eksempel. Mikkel står i spidsen for et projekt, der hedder Aktiv Medborgerskab og Social Entreprenørskab, og er et fremragende eksempel på også, hvordan... Skal vi lige have den der præcis? Jeg kan ikke multitaske, beklager.
Ja, jeg starter bare.
Ja, værsgo, ordet er dit, så skal jeg lige have det her teknikken til at køre.
Jamen, først og fremmest tusind tak for invitationen, and thank you very much for the interviews and the reviews of how it is today, just for English guests. Very nice to hear. Først og fremmest vil jeg starte et lidt andet sted. For lige at forklare hurtigt, hvad aktiv medborgerskab sådan er, så er det en samskabelsesproces. Og den bedste måde, jeg kan gøre det på, det er faktisk ved at finde telefonen her frem. Jeg tror nok, I mange af jer har hørt Helle Thorning og den der selfie-bølge, hun startede. Og jeg vil sådan set vælge den anden måde at tage et billede af jer på til at starte med. Så vink, smil. Det er godt, ser godt ud. Det er sådan set samskabelse. I sidder alle sammen, og nu får jeg samlet på et billede. Det modsatte havde været, hvis jeg havde haft en dagsorden, som jeg kunne køre afsted med, så havde jeg taget en selfie i stedet for. Bare lige for at klargøre, at når der er mange aktører, der bliver samlet på kryds og tværs, så kan det faktisk godt lykkes. Normalt vil jeg egentlig også have skrevet et Vejle-logo på her, fordi jeg er jo ansat i Vejle Kommune. Og normalt vil jeg også have givet jer 5 minutter til at finde ud af, hvorfor det ikke står der. Men det har vi ikke tid til, fordi jeg har kun fået et lille kvarter. Så jeg vil sige, at begrundelsen for det er, at vi hele tiden skal tænke på tværs af sektorer. Og derfor giver det god mening ikke at have et Vejle-logo på her i dag. Den anden ting, I kunne have tænkt over måske, det er, hvorfor er det et træ, at der er her med social resiliens og aktiv medborgerskab. Jo, det er den simple grund, at vi godt kan sammentænke den sociale resiliens med klimatilgangen til resiliens, så de to bliver connected. Det er jo sådan lige 2 små pointer her ved det indlede. Så får vi se, om træet det virker. Sådan der. Mit indlæg her, det kommer til at have fokus på lidt omkring aktive medborgere. I får lige et lille spot på trekantsklingen også. Så får I vide, at der faktisk sker noget i Vejle. Får lidt at vide om, hvad udfordringerne ellers. Får at vide om, at der faktisk kan blive inspireret, når man er en by. Og det her det er en by i Rockefeller-forstand, det vil sige Vejlemæssigt. Så er der, hvad er det for nogle pointer, jeg sådan set har udledt. Og så mit bud på, er social resiliens fremtidens nøgleord her. Det, jeg arbejder meget med, det er det aktive medborgerskab. Som sagt, det handler om at koble nogle aktører, der ikke er blevet set før med forskellige steder. Det er en satsning, at Vejle Byråd har lavet i en 2-årig periode, og det er for alle sektorer, man kobler frem og tilbage. Det mest presserende her i samfundet lige nu, det er, at der foregår rigtig meget. Vi har et komplekst samfund, det kommer også ind på udfordringerne. Men i et komplekst samfund, så er det ikke altid, man lige har kigget på de aktører, der egentlig er. Man kan have mange forskellige aktører inden for alle områderne, som ikke bliver samlet, men som måske laver det samme. Og der er en af mine opgaver, det er så at samle og få inspireret de ildsjæle, der er, så ilden den kan brænde videre. Det sociale entreprenørskab handler sådan set også lidt om de her ildsjæle. Når man er social entreprenør, så har man jo også en brand for et eller andet bestemt. Vi har alle sammen nogle interessefelter, og det sociale entreprenørskab kan være med til at fremme nogle dagsordner også. Og så i sidste ende, så kobler det sig lidt sammen til hele det her social resiliensbegreb, som bliver udviklet her i strategien. Trekantsklingen, som jeg kender det nu til dags, det er stat, offentlig sektor, det er civilsamfundet og det er markedet. Hver især har man sin rolle, og hver især har man sine udfordringer. Det aktive medborgerskab eller den sociale resiliens er sådan set ment som en, der kan koble, som sagt. Men det virkelig interessante er, hvis man kan flå det op i et større perspektiv, så kunne det være et bud på en 4. sektor. En social sektor, en resilienssektor, hvor ildsjæle på kryds og tværs mødes. Ikke bare for civilsamfundet, men også de virksomheder, der brænder, de kommunale medarbejdere, der brænder, og de forvaltninger, der brænder for et vist emne, og få sat sammen og tale om både udfordringer og løsninger, og hvordan det samskabes. Udfordringerne her i dag i samfundet, som kan ses, det er meget, at der er nogle fællesskaber, der bliver løsere. Man bliver mere og mere ad hoc. Vi har et rigt foreningsliv, men mange vælger måske kun at deltage via et medlemskab. Måske ikke ligger 100% energi helt året rundt. Vælger måske nogle små ting ud, 2 timers ting, og så bliver det mere og mere løst baseret. Vi kan også se det selv, når vi rejser rundt omkring. Det kan være i DSB. Tidligere var vi måske meget velvillige til at sætte os i samme kupé over for hinanden, sætte så tæt som muligt. Jeg ved ikke, når jeg men sidste ude at rejse, så valgte man altid den tomme 4-mandskupé, fordi så kunne man sidde alene. Og det er måske ens bevæggrund, at man gerne vil sidde alene. Det kan også være, at man måske er bange for at forstyrre de andre. Men et eller andet sted, så er det også et tegn på, at nogle fællesskaber er under opbrud. Så er der individualiseringen, og den kan sådan set være god nok. Der, hvor problemet er, det er, når man ikke kigger ud over ens egen næsetip. Som Benjamin Barber og andre også var inde på, jamen så er det noget nærhed, noget tillid, og den er måske ikke til stede hele tiden. Og det er det, der måske skal til at kigges på. Og så er der hele det her med manglende fokus på de positive ressourcer. Vi er alle sammen mennesker, der alle sammen har noget at bidrage med. Måske i stedet for at kigge på, hvad man ikke kan bidrage med, så skal vi være endnu bedre til at se på, hvad der egentlig er stærke sider hos folk og aktører. Det kan også være med til at skabe nogle nye ildsjæle, så den 4. sektor, som det aktive medborgerskab og social resiliens kunne blive til, det kan blive udvidet til at dække endnu større område af de 3 sektorer, jeg var inde på før. Der sker noget i Vejle by. Nu taler jeg kun om Vejle by her nu. Der er, som Jonas også var inde på, byhave. Det er Dyrk Vejle, der står for det. Der er projekt Morfar, hvor seniorer er med i ungdomsskoleregi og coacher nogle af de unge. Der sker en hel masse med forældre og bedstemødre, der er involveret i skoler, i børnehaver, og på hele velfærdsområdet er der også involvering. Så det er ikke fordi, der ikke sker noget. Det må I endelig ikke tro. Problemet er bare, når man ikke ved, hvad der sker, og hvis man ikke har det fokuseret nok, hvis man ikke ved, hvad folk de brænder for, og hvis man ikke er sammen om nogle af de her udfordringer, identificerer dem, så kan vi heller ikke køre i samme retning, kan man sige. Så hvis man kan understøtte det, folk de brænder for, så kan der ske endnu mere. Vejle kan jo sådan set også lade sig inspirere, og det kan andre bysamfund også. Jeg har lige taget et par konkrete eksempler med fra det, man kalder oplandet. Der er et fra Højen, som jeg går ind på. Højen er sådan et lille sogneområde på 1300 indbyggere, som er i udvikling. Det kommer jeg ind på senere. Egtved og Børkop er tidligere centerbyer, som har hver sin størrelse. Egtved på ca. 2300 borgere, og Børkop på ca. 5.000 indbyggere. Det, der er det sjove ved det, det er, at Egtved og Børkop efter kommunesammenlægningen er begyndt at tage nogle af de samme tendenser til sig, som Højen har gjort i mange år. Altså, at man er nødt til at finde nogle flere fællesskaber, have nogle tættere relationer, bakke op for at få et levende samfund og aktivitet. Tingene kommer ikke af sig selv. Og så har jeg taget et lille eksempel med uden for Vejle Kommune, som er Klitmøller. I har nok hørt om Cold Hawaii. Det er faktisk et rigtig godt eksempel op fra Jammerbugten af, hvordan man som lokale ildsjæle har skabt noget ekstra i samarbejde med hinanden. Det første eksempel, Højen. Jamen, der er sådan set et multihus, at man er gået sammen om. Byen kender godt hinanden. Man kan samle 100 mennesker mindst, hvis det er. Alle kender til, hvem der sidder med hvad nærmest. Og det er et område, hvor man gerne vil udvikling. Det er lige så snart, man hører Højen, så siger man, jamen, der sker noget i Højen. Hvad sker der? Ja, det ved vi ikke, men der sker noget i Højen. Nu kan jeg så sige, noget af det, der sker, det er for eksempel multihus. Det er venner for Højen, der hele tiden prøver at mobilisere nogle økonomiske ressourcer, og det er byfest i Højen, som giver et større fællesskab. Og det er måske nogle af de ting, man kan lade sig inspirere af i et bymæssigt sammenhæng, at man skal være bedre til at skabe nogle fællesskaber, nogle relationer, noget tæthed, noget nærhed, og få koblet de aktører, der er. Så er der Egtved. Der er Robert Hus, som jo tidligere var kommunecenter, bycenter, og det bliver i dag brugt som et værksætterhus og kulturelt hus, hvor der er nedsat også et udviklingsråd i nærområdet til ligesom at understøtte alle de aktiviteter, der skal ske. For som sagt, det der tidligere måske skete af sig selv, det kommer ikke ud af ingenting nu. Der er nødt til hele tiden med kræfter, der brænder for det, og prøve at engagere folk. Og så synes jeg faktisk, det er meget sjovt, fordi det man gør, når ikke kan se her, hvor der står velkommen, det er meget småt, men der står der deltag aktivt. Du kan være med til at forny din by, og dermed også forny din by i den der store boble. Så det er også en italesættelse af det hele. Børkop har også fået nedsat et lokalråd, og de brander sig lidt. Hvis man er virkelig down with it, som man siger, så siger man 70-80, yeah. Det gør vi ikke helt her. Men det er for at sige, at der er ved at blive skabt en fælles identitet. Der er tanker om et multihus, hvor man også gerne vil have samlet nogle kræfter, nogle af de aktører, der er tale om. Og så har man også fundet nogle fælles udfordringer omkring den gamle stationsbygning, hvordan man ligesom kan få gjort det bedre, så byen kan udvikle sig. Det er blandt andet sådan, at man kan komme nemmere over, hvis man har gangbesvær. Og det er jo også nogle af de udfordringer, vi sidder med i velfærdssamfundet. Der er nogle udsatte grupper, som vi på en eller anden måde er nødt til at tage hånd om, som hverken markedet kan tage hånd om alene, hverken staten kan tage hånd om alene, og det kan civilsamfundet heller ikke tage hånd om alene. Så er der Cold Hawaii. Det startede faktisk med en lille uoverensstemmelse mellem kommunen og nogle ildsjæle, der gerne vil... Ja, der var noget med nogle vindmøller, lad os sige det sådan. Det er vist den nemmeste måde at sige det på. Det udviklede sig til, at en fyr, der hedder Rasmus Jonsson, valgte i stedet for at sige, jamen, hvad kan vi fokusere på, der kan skabe noget aktivitet? Hvordan kan vi få koblet det her op på nogle specielle effekter, der er i vores samfund? Så han valgte at så samskabe, som man siger, så han fandt nogen i det civile samfund, der blev understøtte. Han fik også nogle af de lokale virksomheder til at bakke op. Og så lidt sjovt, så fremlagde han faktisk de effekter, de havde fundet ud af på et surfboard, til at nu skulle man skabe et Cold Hawaii, et surferparadis, lidt ligesom det almindelige Hawaii, bare i Jammerbugten. Det tog de rigtig godt imod derop, og på den måde havde man faktisk en samskabelsesproces, hvor alle tre sektorer var dækket. Blot lige for at give nogle eksempler på, hvad man kan lade sig inspirere af. Det, der er sådan af de ordnede pointer i hele det her oplæg sådan set, det er, at man faktisk kan hente noget læring i de her små lokale samfund. Jeg siger ikke, at man skal kopiere, jeg siger bare, at man kan hente noget læring i forhold til de fællesskaber, der bliver skabt. Man kender de aktører, der er lokalt, man ved, hvem der kan hvad, og man er villig til at bakke nogle ildsjæle op. Det er vi som sagt også i Vejle by. Men det er så kompleks en størrelse, at vi er nødt til nogle gange at kigge ud over vores egen næsetip og være klar til åbenhed, noget forandring og blive koblet sammen med andre. Og det er ikke altid, det lykkes første gang, så må man prøve igen. Og det er også det, man kalder prøvehandlinger med et nyt ord. Og hvis de her prøvehandlinger lykkes tilstrækkeligt med gange, så kan vi i sidste ende måske også komme frem til et koncept, der kan være til at skabe en fjerde sektor i vores samfund. Der er netværk, det kan opløse byens grænser. Vi har måske nogle ghettoer, vi har måske nogle kvarterer, gågader. Jamen, hvordan kan netværk være med til at løsne op for de grænser, der måske er fysisk? Hvordan kan vi samtænke også i arkitekturen? Og hvordan kan vi samtænke den sociale resiliens med klimatilpasning, med at få nogle kvarterer, nogle boligforeninger, nogle grundejerforeninger til at bakke op om det? Og det er netop de her fællesskaber, der dannes og relationer forbindes. Byens indhold, det skabes af borgere, det er et laboratorium, det er prøvehandlinger. Som sagt, det er ikke, hvad jeg brænder for, men det er, hvad borgerne brænder for, hvad forvaltningsmedarbejdere brænder for, hvad virksomheder brænder for. Det er det, der er det essentielle i det hele. Og borgerens ild, det er jo måske det, der kan faciliteres af os i det offentlige. Som sagt, så er det måske en helt ny rolle, vi skal vende os til, når vi prøver at koble sammen. Det er, at vi virkelig faciliterer, i stedet for løst alene. Så det aller sidste, det er social resiliens. Er det fremtiden? Og der synes jeg, man skal have ja-hatten på. Det er symboliseret ved en lille fin hat, hvor der står ja. Men det er jo selvfølgelig nødvendigt med en strategi. Det er nødvendigt, at der er en kobling af kendte og ukendte aktører. Det er nødvendigt, at vi har et større netværk, at vi har noget relationsdannelse, og så det her tværgående, hvordan vi kombinerer markedet, den offentlige sektor og civilsamfundet. Så lad os da håbe på, at om en 5-10 år, så siger de også, jamen, der sker en hel masse i Vejle. Vi ved bare ikke helt hvad, men der sker noget. Det kunne i hvert fald være et rigtig godt udgangspunkt for, hvordan man får en resiliens by. Tak for ordet.
Tusind tak. Tak, Mikkel. Rigtig spændende, rigtig spændende. Jeg vil egentlig bare lige slutte af med at sige, at vi startede jo sådan set herude i det helt store perspektiv. Fik talesat nogle af de agendaer, som vi kommer til at arbejde med fremover, som vi jo på ingen måde, hvad kan man sige, kan lukke øjnene for, eller sige, det har ikke noget med os at gøre. Vi fik diskuteret en lille smule omkring, hvad det kommer til at betyde for os, hvad det er, resiliensbegrebet kan tilbyde. Vi har hørt lidt om, kan man sige, hvad det er, vi står på. Vi har et solidt udgangspunkt. Vi har faktisk en rigtig stærk og robust by, og der er mulighed for rent faktisk, at vi kan bygge videre på det, og der er også mulighed for, at de nye typer af afhængigheder og udfordringer, vi kan se, de faktisk kan danne grundlag for erhvervslivet, for nye måder at skabe interaktion mellem borgere og for etableringen af den her fjerde sektor, som jeg også tror på, kan man sige, bliver en vigtig trædesten i morgendagens resiliente by. Til slut vil jeg egentlig bare have lov at sige tak, fordi I kom. Jeg vil gerne sige tak til hele teamet bag ved konferencen. Trine, Annemette, Bodil og så videre for at holde, skal vi ikke lige give dem en hånd, holde styr på alt det her. And thank you for joining us here today. I hope the last part made sense. You're now part of the Viking family, you know, so... Og så vil jeg egentlig bare sige, så er der lidt mulighed for, at I her til sidst kan få lov lige at stille nogle spørgsmål om møde hinanden. Men tak for i dag, og vi ses snart igen.